They said he was just a quiet man flipping pancakes in a roadside diner, but that illusion shattered the moment a billionaire biker ripped open his shirt. Gasps froze the room, not because of scars, but because of the Marine Corps tattoo burned into his chest. The eagle globe and anchor revealed ghosts no one expected to see in this dusty Arizona town. What was a decorated war hero doing hiding behind an apron? And why did the tattoo leave even the biker queen herself trembling? Follow my story to the end, and don't forget to comment the city you are watching from, so I'll know how far this story has traveled and how far these quiet miracles can still reach. The air inside Lena's joint clung heavy, thick with grease coffee and desert heat. Ceiling fans churned but barely cooled the place. Outside, the Arizona sun baked the asphalt into a mirage. Old men nursed chipped mugs, couples picked at meatloaf, and children tapped spoons on tabletops while Merle Haggard crooned low from the jukebox. Then the roar came. It started faint like thunder crawling up the highway, then grew until glasses trembled and conversations cut mid-sentence. Chrome and leather swept past the windows. Harleys, a whole pack gleaming like black wolves under the blaze. Heads turned, forks stopped halfway. Even Mary the waitress froze with her pad in hand. The door swung open like a challenge. Ramona Steele entered first. Her name was whispered in rumors that stretched from Tucson bars to Nevada highways. The billionaire biker queen. She strode in with jet black shades hiding eyes sharp enough to cut glass, her sleeveless vest revealing arms of coiled muscle and inkwings, firewolves in snarl. Boots struck the floor like hammers, each step commanding the room. Behind her flowed 6 others in high-end leather helmets tucked under arms, eyes masked in arrogance. They didn't wear patch denim like road trash. They wore money disguised as menace. But it was Ramona everyone watched. She peeled off her sunglasses, slowly surveying the room like a queen inspecting subjects. Conversation died completely. In the corner behind the counter's heat and haze, Daniel Harlow flipped pancakes. His name tag read simply Dan. Sleeves rolled to the elbow, scars lined his forearms like half-buried stories. He didn't look up, didn't slow, just worked steady as stone. Ramona's voice cut through the silence, smooth but commanding. "Is this seat taken?" She didn't wait for an answer, sliding onto a stool at the long-worn counter, her gaze fixed on him. "I hear the pie's good here." That true cowboy Daniel finally looked at her. Calm, unflinching, not hostile, but not yielding. "If you're polite to Mary," he said, evenly nodding at the waitress, "you might get a warm slice." Mary nearly dropped her pen. Ramona smirked, tilting her head. "Polite, darling, I don't wear polite." She leaned back, scanning the room, her crew chuckling under their breath. Mary scribbled nervously on her pad, glancing at Daniel like he might anchor her against the storm. Ramona leaned closer across the counter. "You look familiar. Ever ride with the Broken Sons out of Nevada?" "Nope." "You serve." Daniel wiped the grill, his motions precise, unhurried. "A lot of people serve." "You got that look," she pressed. "A man who's seen blood and made peace with it." He said nothing. His silence held weight, the kind that bent conversations around it. Then came the spark. One of Ramona's bikers, slick hair, mirrored glasses, smirk sharp enough to cut, muttered something crude at Mary as she passed. Ramona laughed. Not kindly. A laugh honed to cut. Daniel moved. Not loud, not aggressive. He just stepped between Mary and the biker, his voice low and firm. "No need for that." The biker rolled his eyes. "Easy, Gramps. Just talking." But the room felt the shift. Quiet, dangerous, inevitable. Ramona stepped closer, studying Daniel like prey that looked too much like a predator. "You've got this noble warrior vibe," she said. Ex-soldier turned fry cook hiding in plain sight. She reached out too fast, too sharp. Her hand caught his collar, yanked. The sound of fabric tearing cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Gasps followed. Someone dropped a plate. The jukebox sputtered to silence. Daniel's shirt gaped open. Across his chest and shoulder, ink spread like a banner, the eagle globe and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. Below faded but undeniable force recon. Operation Red Dust. Gunnery Sergeant Daniel J. Harlow. And the scars. Jagged, brutal, carved deep by fire and shrapnel. These weren't decorative. These were battles written into flesh. Ramona's hand fell. Her face shifted. Mockery drained, replaced by something raw, unsettled. She staggered back a step. The diner froze in desert hush. Even the cicadas outside seemed to hold their breath. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't reach for anger or pride. He simply pulled the torn halves of his shirt together and looked Ramona dead in the eye. "Some things aren't meant to be displayed," he said, voice steady as stone. "They're meant to be remembered." He plated a slice of rhubarb pie, slid it across the counter toward her. "That's on the house. First slice is always free. But respect." His gaze sharpened. That cost something. Then he walked away. Calm. Untouched. The silence he left behind was heavier than any roar. By morning, whispers would ripple across the county. A ghost had walked out of the shadows, and his name was Daniel Harlow. By dawn, the desert carried whispers, the way wind carried dust, fast, relentless, impossible to catch. At every truck stop, every bar, every church hall, the story was the same. They say he's Force Recon. Red Dust Survivor, that was classified. Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Harlow, 3 Bronze Stars. Declined the Medal of Honor if you believe it. In Willow Creek, a town where gossip was currency. Daniel's quiet diner suddenly felt like a vault cracked open, and though he never said a word, people filled the silence for him. At the elementary school it landed hardest. Emma Harlow, 9 years old, wire-rimmed glasses slipping down her nose, stepped off the bus with her backpack bouncing. She loved school, loved sharpened pencils, and tidy rows, but today felt different. The air buzzed with questions. "Is it true your dad's a killer?" a boy blurted before she even reached the doors. Another chimed in. "My dad said, he's got a death tattoo. Did he shoot people? Bet he's got bodies in the basement." Emma froze, fists tight at her sides. Her throat burned, but she remembered what her dad had taught her. Blink once, slow, once fast. Dry your eyes without letting them see. So she blinked, straightened her shoulders, and kept walking. Inside the classroom, she buried herself in her notebook, sketching lines that turned into shields and suns. She didn't cry, not where anyone could see. Back at the diner, the world had changed overnight. Locals filled booths not for the food, but for the story. Customers asked Mary, the waitress, for details. She only shook her head, lips pressed tight, loyal to the man behind the grill. Daniel moved the same as ever. Crack of eggs, hiss of bacon spatula, precise as a surgeon's hand. He didn't acknowledge the eyes that followed his every motion. Around noon, the bell above the door jingled. Sheriff Cole Maddox stepped in. Cole was 58 silver at his temples, a badge dull from years of wear. He'd been sheriff long enough to know that silence told louder truths than shouting ever did. He slid onto a stool at the counter like it was ritual, not law. "Coffee," he said. Daniel poured it black, set it down. No words. "You know they're talking," Cole said, stirring with a spoon he didn't need. "Kid at the Texaco says you got Marine Death Inc. Folks at the VFW swear they seen that tat once years ago." Daniel wiped the counter. Still silent. Cole leaned in, lowering his voice. "You still haven't told her, huh? Not even Emma." Daniel's hand paused cloth mid-circle. His eyes lifted calm but sharp. Told her what Cole smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't play dumb with me." Red dust. The silence between them thickened heavy as concrete. Cole sighed, leaning back, sipping coffee like it owed him rent. "You ever gonna tell her what happened?" Daniel set the rag aside, stood straight. "I already did." Cole frowned. When by living like this, Daniel said simply and turned back to the grill. Cole didn't push. He knew that tone, the kind a man used when the book was closed, even if it still burned in his hands. That night, Emma sat on the back porch, cross-legged school bag still slumped beside her. She hadn't touched her sandwich. The desert sky stretched endless above stars, pricking holes in the dark. Daniel stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. "You didn't eat." She didn't look up. "They said you were a killer." He lowered himself beside her, the porch groaning under his weight. For a moment, he only listened to the cicadas buzzing in the mesquite. "I was a Marine," he said softly. "That means sometimes I had to make hard decisions. Not because I wanted to, because others were in danger." Emma's voice cracked. "Did you kill people?" He didn't soften it, didn't excuse it. Yes, and I saved people. I tried to save more than I lost. She twisted the strap of her backpack knuckles white. There was a mission once, Daniel continued, voice low, steady. Far away. A building full of children. Bad men used them as shields. My team went in. We got most of them out. But he stopped, swallowed hard. I lost 3 brothers that day, men I trusted with my life. The words trembled in the air, half confession, half scar. Emma looked up at him, not angry, not afraid, just searching. Did it make you stop being a soldier? Daniel's jaw tightened. He shook his head slowly. No, it made me stop being at war. Emma pressed her lips together, then leaned into him, small head against his arm. He wrapped it around her, staring out at the desert night. And in the silence, the ghost pressed closer, uninvited, but never gone. The neon over Lena's joint hummed like a tired insect, its pink glow breathing against the window glass as the town settled into its nightly hush. Chairs were flipped onto tables, crumbs swept into a soft hill on Mary's dustpan, and the grill cooled with little sighs. Daniel locked the front door, turned the deadbolt, and let the day's noise leak out of his chest on a slow exhale. A knock came, quick 2 raps, a pause, a third. Sheriff Cole Maddox didn't wait for the invitation. He slid in through the side door, hat in hand, boots, whispering over tile as if the place were a chapel. Daniel didn't ask what he wanted. He poured coffee into 2 thick mugs and set one down on the counter between them, steam curling like prayer. Town's awake, the sheriff said, easing onto a stool. Hard to get them to sleep once they smell a story. Daniel wiped a circle on the stainless steel with a rag. They'll forget by Friday. Maybe, but not this part. Cole tapped 2 fingers where Daniel's shirt had split earlier. They saw the truth. The truth, Daniel said, calm, is breakfast at 6 and the school run at 7:15. Cole smiled, but only with half his face. Red dust, he said softly, like the words themselves might trigger alarms. I was in Fallujah the year before. Different sand, same ghosts. I remember the radio chatter when your op went sideways. I wasn't there, but I heard the tone men get when they realized no one's coming except the men already there. Daniel kept his eyes on the counter. In the kitchen, the last drip from the dish rack ticked the sink. We went in for children, he said finally. Bad men were using them as a wall. Someone had to make a hole without killing what we came to save. And you made the call, Cole said. Daniel didn't nod, didn't deny. His jaw worked a muscle in his cheek, going tight and then gone. Split the team. 2 on extraction, 2 on clearance, me on structure. There was a beam ready to go. We didn't have cribbing, didn't have time. I told Petrov to watch the corner. Morales covered the hall. Done. He stopped the name catching. Dunn took the first kid. I took the second. The building let go like it had been holding its breath too long. In his head, the night returned whole and hot. Heat that tasted like copper. Dust so thick, it turned daylight into fake dusk. The cough that had called to him from under a slanted ceiling. He could feel rebar under his palms, powdered chalk on his tongue. Hear radio beeps swallowed by stone. The beam shuddered. Somewhere a door frame screamed as nails tore loose. His knees bit gravel as he slid one shoulder under the load boot, skidding. Move, he had barked, throat raw. Go now. Dunn's hand had pressed a tiny shoulder past him, a child's hair matted with ash. The girl's eyes were too big for her face, a butterfly crude blue and gold inked in shaky lines on a small wrist. Morales shouted. The beam groaned. The world went to splinters. Back in the diner, the neon hummed. Cole took a sip and let heat settle his own tremor. I read the citation later, he said. The one they drafted for you. Medal of Honor if the brass had their way. Then I read your decline. Short letter, no theatrics. Respectfully declined in memory of Gunnery Sergeant Dunn Corporal Morales, Hospital Man Petrov. That's the closest thing to a prayer I ever heard come out of a typewriter. Daniel's fingers tightened around the mug. They didn't need me wearing a medal, he said quietly. They needed me remembering their names right. That's not a ribbon thing. That's a living thing. You could tell Emma Cole said gentler now. She's strong. Stronger than half the men who carry badges in this county. She asked me if I killed people, Daniel replied. I told her yes. I told her I saved people too. That's as far as I know how to go just yet. Cole drummed the counter with a knuckle, then reached into his pocket and set something down that clicked soft against the laminate. A challenge coin scuffed by years of pockets and nights like this. I don't carry this for me. I carry it for the ones I couldn't help. If she ever asks why her daddy's hands shake opening a jar, show her this. Tell her the shaking is the body's way of letting ghosts pass without breaking the glass. Daniel looked at the coin but didn't touch it. You think the town will settle? Some folks will make trouble because trouble gives their mornings a shape, Cole said. Most will just bring casseroles and questions. The dangerous kind of people are the ones who see a place like this as an asset column, not a table where a man's soul can sit and breathe. Developers. Daniel said, voice flat. Or worse, Cole said, staring through the window at his reflection. Thin, a little stooped a man who had chosen to be needed for so long, he didn't know how to be anything else. There's a rumor. A company sniffing around the old highway. Shell on top of shell. Horizon Ridge, steel horizons somewhere in the chain. You ever hear of a woman named Ramona Steele? Daniel's eyes didn't change. The name passed over his face like a cloud, then moved on. She was in here yesterday, he said. Wanted pie. Got history instead. Cole snorted. From what I hear, she got both. Daniel took the coin, then turned it in his palm, the ridges familiar as a rosary. He didn't say he was grateful. The sheriff didn't say he was worried. They sat in the quiet until their coffee cooled to a temperature that required no courage at all, only habit. When Cole left, his hand paused on the doorframe, knuckles whitening for a heartbeat, as if considering a confession he didn't owe anyone. He settled for truth instead. You're not hiding, Dan, he said. You're anchoring. There's a difference. Don't let them convince you of the wrong one. After he left, the diner breathed like a sleeping thing. Daniel walked to the back past the mop sink and the bags of flour to the narrow utility room where the air always smelled faintly of detergent and steel. He pulled down a dented toolbox from the top shelf. Inside, not wrenches folded desert camo with sun-faded elbows, a bundle of chevrons, a length of parachute cord with a knot only. Recon taught his old field knife wrapped in oiled cloth, a pair of dog tags with the notch worn smooth by thumb. Beneath it all, a photo warped by heat edges curled like leaves. 4 men stood in the picture dust, running lines down their faces like war paint. Morales's grin wide as the desert Petrov, half in shadow. Dunn trying to look mean and failing, and Daniel behind them, all posture held by duty and something too brittle to name. At their boots, a chalk drawing on a broken slab, a sun with too many rays, a stick figure holding hands with another, both smiling as if nothing there could fall down or burn. He put the photo back. He closed the box. He rested his hand on the lid a moment longer, pulse tapping at his wrist like a memory that wouldn't stand still. Then he turned off the light and let the room go to dark. At home, Emma slept with her glasses on the nightstand and her sketchbook open beside her. The day had swollen big in her chest, then finally let go. In her dreams, napkins became paper cranes, and paper cranes became helicopters, and helicopters became butterflies that landed on her father's shoulder and didn't fly away even when he moved too fast. She woke once certain she'd heard boots on gravel. Just wind, just the desert rearranging itself like it always did. Morning painted the sky with a dry, pale blue. The school smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria toast. Emma kept her head down and drew during recess, legs tucked under her on the bench, the graphite smudging the side of her hand. A shadow crossed her paper. She looked up to find Principal Avery. Tie loose hair a little too neat for Arizona. Your dad's a Marine, he said like he was reading a weather report. Yes, sir. You know he started... Then stopped. He seemed to rearrange the sentence inside his mouth, tucking away the parts that might hurt by accident. You know we're proud of the families who carry certain burdens. If anyone gives you trouble, you come to me. She nodded. He didn't pat her head. He didn't ask to see her drawing. That small mercy settled in her like warm tea. On the way home, kids asked again, kinder this time, tangled in awe more than cruelty. Is it true he saved children? Can he teach us knots? Does he know how to make pancakes in the shape of dinosaurs? Emma smiled and shrugged. Maybe she said, he's good at shapes. At the diner that afternoon, regulars tried to act normal. Frank Mallory, the retired trucker, who'd once gone 3 months without a word, set a battered thermos on the counter and said, "You were out of coffee filters last week." I brought some. The gift was not the filters. It was the sentence. Mary floated between booths with a softness that hadn't been there yesterday. She mouthed, "You okay" at Daniel when he passed her the maple syrup. He nodded once. That was enough. A tow-headed teen in a Letterman jacket hovered near the pie case until he lost nerve. Daniel called him over anyway. Apple or rhubarb? Apple, sir. You don't have to, sir. Me." The kid swallowed. "My brother's in the army," he said, words tumbling. He said Marines are different. Daniel cut the slice with a blade that sang against the plate. "We all get cut," he said. "What matters is what you do with the scar." He slid the plate across. The kid stared at it like it might be a medal and a mystery at once. He paid with wrinkled bills and left $1 more than he had to. Late, when the shadows in the diner went long and thin, Daniel took the sheriff's coin from his pocket and thumbed the edge until a groove in the metal became a map his skin could read with eyes closed. He set it on the shelf near the register beside a mason jar of sugar packets and a photograph of Emma at 7 holding a fish in both hands, face shocked at its slick weight. Behind the counter, he refolded the torn shirt he'd stitched himself during the lunch lull. The needle had tugged hard through fabric weakened by a life. He'd kept the seam crooked on purpose. He liked a flaw he could see. The door breathed and a draft carried the scent of leather that wasn't from any bar stool in the room. Daniel looked up. No one stood there. Just the last blush of sun fading off the highway and the sound of a motorcycle fading with it, headed down into the dark where the stars waited like 1,000 unasked questions. Miles away, high above Tucson glass walls, reflected a city that didn't sleep unless paid to. A woman sat with her boots on a table that cost more than the diner's monthly egg bill, scrolling through public records she shouldn't have had, and private ones she wished she didn't. Ramona Steele's hand paused over a line that read, "Like a Ghost Gunnery Sergeant Daniel J. Harlow, Force Recon Operation Red Dust." The words didn't scare her. What scared her was a flash of a memory she'd hidden under chrome and contracts, a jacket too big around her shoulders, a man's hands lifting her out of smoke, and on her own small wrist, a blue and gold butterfly that refused to fade. She closed her eyes. The city kept glittering. Somewhere out in the desert, a quiet man was washing a pan, and the scrape of steel on steel sounded like a match being struck inside a heart that had been dark for too long. The city lights glared against the glass of Ramona Steele's penthouse, a crown of neon stretched across Tucson's horizon. Inside her office felt like another world, steel, leather, cold marble surfaces where nothing lived unless it was ordered and imported. She sat back in her chair boots on the edge of a polished table, scrolling through a dossier that should never have been easy to find. But money and power opened files faster than keys. On the screen glowed the name she hadn't expected to see again: Gunnery Sergeant Daniel J. Harlow, Force Recon, Operation Red Dust, Bronze Stars, Purple Heart. Medal of Honor declined in handwriting that looked like steel bent into words. Ramona closed her eyes, and a different glow rose in her memory. Not neon, not LED screens, but fire. Mosul, years ago. She'd been no more than 5 ash in her hair blood stinging her scalp. The air had screamed with collapse. And then a man had lifted her, wrapped her in a jacket that hung like a tent, pressing her against his chest so tightly she thought his heartbeat might carry her out. She hadn't remembered his face, not clearly, only the steady strength of hands, the smell of sand and smoke. But she remembered what he said, voice low through the chaos. "You're not invisible. Not to me." Her left wrist tingled. She pulled off her glove. There, faded but permanent, was the butterfly blue and gold, the crude tattoo she had inked herself in that refugee camp with a bottle cap and a needle. A child's attempt at permanence. For years she'd hidden it under leather and wealth, but tonight it pulsed like it had been waiting. "Boss?" Her assistant's voice cracked the memory. A young man in a techwear jacket slid a tablet onto the desk. Deep dive. "That cook." "He's not a cook." Ramona didn't look up. She already knew. Still, she flipped through the file. Commendations. Classified commendations. Reports redacted until they were more black than white. At the bottom, one photo, 4 men in full gear, dust caked across their faces, a schoolhouse crumbling behind them. 3 grinning. 1 Daniel, too steady for smiles, her throat caught. Why walk away from that? Her assistant asked. Guilt. Ramona muttered, eyes still fixed on the picture. Or humility. Or maybe he got tired of bleeding. Her assistant shrugged, leaving her with the tablet and her ghosts. When the office emptied, Ramona stood at the window. The city glittered, but her reflection was darker, tattoos, leather fire. She pressed her wrist against the glass, the butterfly faint but unyielding. She whispered to the night, "It was you." Back in Willow Creek, the diner settled into routine. Though routine now felt like a mask stretched too tight. Daniel still cracked eggs with the same flick, still poured coffee without spilling a drop. But the eyes that followed him weren't watching for breakfast. They were searching for stories. Mary bustled more than usual, filling space with chatter, scolding customers who pressed too hard. "He's just a man," she said, shoving pie slices onto plates with authority. But her own eyes lingered longer on Daniel when he moved past, as if she'd never really seen him until now. Emma sat in the corner booth after school, notebook, open pencils lined like soldiers. Her drawings had changed. Less kittens, more soldiers with wings. One sketch showed her dad behind a counter, a spatula raised like a sword. Another had her beside him, holding a plate like a shield. She bit her lip as she shaded the lines, wishing people would stop whispering. Daniel noticed. He leaned down, voice soft. "They still bothering you?" She didn't look up. "Not as bad." "You blinked them away." "Yeah." She managed a faint smile. Daniel brushed her hair from her face. "Good. Remember, Emma, truth isn't in what they say. It's in what you do." That night, while Emma slept in her small room at the back of their trailer, Daniel stood in the laundry nook. He pulled down the battered toolbox, opened it, and stared again at the photo of 4 men and 1 broken school. He didn't touch it long. Just enough to feel the weight of names Petrov, Morales, Dunn. Brothers who hadn't walked out. He pressed the box shut, whispering to no one, "I'm still here." Then he slid it back into place, switched off the light, and let the shadows claim what they always did. The next afternoon, the roar of engines returned. Not as loud as before, not a pack, just 1 bike. Chrome-flashed leather boots thudded. Ramona Steele pushed through the diner door this time without her entourage. Heads turned anyway. Daniel didn't flinch. He flipped a pancake. Ramona slid onto the same stool she had ripped him from 2 days before. Her eyes, uncovered by shades, looked different. Less blade, more burden. "Pie," she said simply. Daniel placed a slice in front of her without a word. She looked down, then up. And an apology. The diner went quiet, the kind of quiet that leaned in. Daniel studied her calm, unreadable. Then he nodded once. "Pie I still make, but apologies. Those take time." Ramona swallowed, forcing words she wasn't used to. "I wasn't raised to say sorry. I was taught to win. That doesn't mean you can't learn." His tone wasn't sharp, just honest. Ramona let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She glanced toward the corner booth where Emma bent over her notebook, sketching again. "Hi, Ramona," said gently. Emma glanced up, wary. "Hello." Ramona leaned closer, spotting the drawing. "That's you and your dad." Emma nodded, protective of her page. "You're very talented," Ramona said softly. Emma studied her with eyes too wise for 9 years. "Do you mean it?" "About the apology?" Ramona's voice cracked a little. "Yeah. I meant it." Emma tilted her head, searching Ramona's face. For a moment, their gazes locked. And in that gaze, Ramona saw something she hadn't expected, a reflection of her own eyes years ago, when she was the child in the rubble. Her chest tightened. The butterfly on her wrist seemed to burn. And for the first time in years, Ramona Steele felt like someone had seen her, not the billionaire, not the biker queen, but the little girl who had once been carried out of fire by hands steady enough to defy collapse. The hush lingered long after Ramona left the diner, her boots echoing across the sidewalk until only the cicadas filled the night. Inside, the regulars pretended to resume conversations, but their eyes betrayed them. Every one of them had felt it, that brief spark of something raw between the biker queen and the quiet veteran behind the counter. Daniel didn't speak of it. He finished wiping down Table's stacked plates with his usual care and locked the front door. When he and Emma walked out together, her hand small in his, the town seemed different, like secrets had finally sprouted roots and broken through the soil. On the walk home, Emma glanced up. "Dad?" "Yeah." "That woman, she looked at you like she knew you." Daniel kept his eyes forward. "She doesn't." Emma narrowed hers. "But she will." Daniel didn't answer. He only squeezed her hand, the desert wind tugging at his shirt sleeve. The next morning, Willow Creek buzzed louder than bees in July. Folks lingered at the Texaco, at the post office, at the one bar with neon that still half worked. Steele came back to the diner, someone whispered. She apologized. To him, another scoffed. She never apologizes. Ever. Maybe he's not just some cook. Sheriff Cole Maddox heard every word. He stood outside the station with his hat tilted low, chewing on a toothpick, eyes sweeping the street. He'd known Daniel since the man first drifted into town 6 years ago, carrying nothing but a duffel and a little girl who clung to his leg. He'd suspected then there was more story than either would say. Now the whole town was sniffing it out like hounds on a trail. Cole didn't like it. Not because Daniel was dangerous, but because too much attention could bring danger right to his door. That night, Ramona Steele didn't return to her penthouse. She rode. Miles of desert highway, under the moon, engine growling like the past chasing her. She thought of the file of the butterfly tattoo on her wrist, of the little girl with brave sketches, and of the man who'd answered her arrogance with silence instead of rage. By dawn, she ended up at a motel on the edge of nowhere. She sat on the curb outside her room helmet, beside her cigarette, forgotten between her fingers. It's him. It has to be him. The memory replayed again, the soldier lifting her from rubble, whispering words she hadn't forgotten. She'd buried it, built an empire over it, tattooed her skin so no one would see the scar beneath. And yet one look at Daniel Harlow, and the ground shook all over again. She closed her eyes. For the first time in decades, Ramona Steele felt small. Back in Willow Creek, the diner saw more strangers than ever. Leather vests with patches, curious riders, even city folk who never stopped before. Word spread like wildfire, Marine vet with a story. Steele ate pie at his counter. Daniel worked with steady rhythm, never indulging a question, never confirming a rumor. Emma helped after school, balancing plates with careful hands. One evening, as Daniel was closing up, Sheriff Cole stepped inside. "Need to talk?" Cole said, voice grave. Daniel nodded, slid into a booth. Cole leaned forward. "Your past doesn't stay buried, Danny. Not in a town like this. Folks will dig. Some will come knocking, not with curiosity, with questions you don't want asked." Daniel's jaw flexed. "I'm not hiding." "No, but you're not telling either." "And that's dangerous." Cole paused, eyes narrowing. "And Steele, what's she doing here?" "She's not the type to hang around a diner unless she's looking for something." Daniel didn't flinch. "Maybe she is." Cole grunted. "You planning to tell me what Daniel's silence was answer enough?" Meanwhile, Ramona found herself circling closer to Willow Creek again. She rode past the diner without stopping, helmet visor down, heart pounding like a drum. She wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. But she couldn't stay away either. She parked a block away, engine cut, and just watched through the glass as Daniel flipped the closed sign. His movements were so deliberate, so ordinary, it twisted something inside her. Billionaires didn't envy cooks. Queens didn't long for silence. Yet here she was, hands trembling, wishing she had the courage to walk in again. That night, Emma woke to the sound of her father pacing. She tiptoed to the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. Dad Daniel froze hand on the counter. "Go back to bed, Em." "Can't sleep." She climbed onto a stool. "Is it about her?" Daniel sighed heavy. He poured her a glass of milk, set it in front of her. "Some people from the past, they remind you of things you want to forget." Emma tilted her head. "But sometimes you need to remember." Daniel studied her, the wisdom in her small face. He brushed her hair back, kissed the top of her head. "Sometimes you're too smart for your own good." She grinned sleepily. "Got it from you." Daniel let himself smile, faint but real. Then he tucked her back into bed, whispering, "Sleep. I'll handle it." But when he returned to the kitchen, his hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the counter. Because deep down he knew the storm wasn't coming, it was already here. The desert air felt heavier that morning, as if the horizon itself braced for impact. At sunrise, Daniel jogged down the dirt road outside the trailer boots, thudding in steady rhythm, sweat beading under the Arizona sun. Running had always been his ritual, a way to outrun the ghosts. But this morning, every stride only brought them closer. At the diner, Mary was already setting up when he arrived. She looked at him with the kind of glance that said something's coming, though she didn't have the words. Daniel tied his apron, washed his hands, and moved to the grill. The smell of bacon filled the air. The hiss of eggs on the flat top drowned out the silence. He found comfort in the Motion's crack flip plate, but he couldn't stop his mind from drifting back to Ramona Steele. By noon, the town's curiosity turned into spectacle. Folks lingered outside, pretending to gas up cars or buy candy from the corner store just to peek inside. Whispers filled the air like static. And then it happened. The low rumble of an engine rolled down Main Street deep enough to rattle windows. A custom black bike chrome gleaming like a blade slowed to a stop outside the diner. Ramona Steele swung off, black leather jacket hugging her frame boots, planting with authority. She carried herself like a storm. People moved without her saying a word. Inside, the bell above the diner door jingled. Daniel didn't look up. Ramona walked straight to the counter, helmet under one arm, eyes burning through him. "Morning," she said, voice softer than anyone expected. "Coffee?" Daniel asked evenly. "Black," she replied, sliding onto the stool. He poured. She took a sip, wincing at the bitterness but hiding it well. Then she set the cup down, her gaze unwavering. "We need to talk." The diner hushed. "Not here," Daniel said. Her lips curved, then where Daniel met her stare unshaken. After hours. That evening, after Emma was home and the diner lights dimmed, Ramona waited outside. Daniel stepped out, locking the door, apron slung over his shoulder. The desert sky blazed in streaks of orange and violet. "Walk with me," she said. They moved down the quiet street, their boots crunching gravel, the town shrinking behind them. The silence between them wasn't empty. It pulsed with all the words neither had spoken for years. Finally, Ramona stopped near the edge of the dry riverbed. She turned to him, pulled back her sleeve, and revealed the butterfly tattoo, faded but unmistakable. Daniel froze. His breath caught. "You," she whispered. "It was you." He stared, memories crashing through him. The burning school, the rubble, the child crying in his arms, the butterfly scratched onto her wrist with desperate hands. "You remember," she said, voice breaking. Daniel's jaw clenched. "I remember saving a child. Didn't know she grew into—" He gestured at her leather, her wealth, her walls. "This." Ramona's eyes glistened. "And I didn't know the man who saved me was hiding in a diner, cooking eggs, like the world never owed him a thing." Daniel looked away, the weight of ghosts pressing against his chest. "I didn't save everyone. 3 of my men didn't walk out. I don't wear medals because medals don't bring them back." She stepped closer. "But you saved me." He finally met her eyes. In them he saw the little girl she had been, the one who clung to him in the smoke, whispering that she was invisible. "You're not invisible," he murmured, the same words he'd spoken years ago. Her breath hitched. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. Why disappear? Why live like a ghost? "Because ghosts don't hurt anyone," he said quietly. For a long moment they stood there, the desert wind wrapping around them, carrying sand and secrets. Later, Daniel returned home. Emma was still awake, waiting on the couch, hugging her sketchbook. "Where were you?" she asked. "Talking," he said. With her, Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Emma studied his face. "Is she dangerous?" "No," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "She's complicated." Emma hugged her sketchbook tighter. "She looked at you like you were her hero." Daniel swallowed hard, lowering himself onto the couch beside her. "I'm no hero, Em." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe not to you, but to her, you might be the only one she ever had." Daniel closed his eyes, letting her words settle in the silence of their small home. He didn't know what storm Ramona Steele was bringing, but for the first time he realized he couldn't just shut the door and walk away. The past had found him, and this time it had a face. The night laid itself over Willow Creek like a cooled sheet of tin. Wind ticked at the street signs. A coyote yipped somewhere beyond the dry riverbed and then thought better of it. Inside Lena's joint, everything was squared away for morning chairs flipped on tables, cash drawer locked, flour bin sealed tight, coffee filters counted and stacked by the machine. Daniel stood at the back door a beat longer than usual, listening the way a man does who once lived by the sound of danger before it had a shape. Nothing but the hush. He turned. The deadbolt walked Emma home, read 2 pages of an old astronomy book out loud until her eyes slid shut, then sat at the small kitchen table and stitched the crooked seam in his torn shirt by a single lamp. At 2:43 a.m., the quiet snapped. Glass fractured with a wet pop. A rag hissed into flame. Fire crawled low along the diner's threshold like a bad intention testing the wood. The bottle hadn't broken clean. The gasoline burped, caught the curtain, then guttered. Heat rose in a wavering tongue. The smoke alarm shrieked once and died batteries too old-timing, too cruel. The silent alarm Daniel had let Sheriff Cole talk him into last year cheap ugly, wired by a deputy with a knack for spare parts, did not die. It whispered the diner's trouble straight into the sheriff's phone. Across town, Daniel was already moving. Boots Key's extinguisher left by the door for grease fires because he trusted foresight more than luck. He shouldered into the night engine of his truck, coughing, then catching headlights slashing the road. His hands didn't shake on the wheel. Training took over, not bravado. He parked crooked, slammed the door, and ran. The front window wore a starburst wound. The screen had blackened. Curtains licked orange. He hit the handle with a towel, flung the door, and swept the extinguisher in a low arc, white snow hushing flame. The hiss sounded like a snake pressed under boot. Smoke thinned. Heat dropped to a sulk. He kept sweeping, kept moving, the old muscle memory of 100 cleared rooms, whispering corners, doorways, air. When the last ember turned to ash, he stood very still and listened. The building breathed under him, insulted, but alive. Red and blue rolled into the lot colors pulsing across the diner's sign. Sheriff Cole strode up with 2 deputies behind him, eyes scanning everything at once. He didn't ask if Daniel was okay. He already knew the answer. He did ask. Inside, small burn. Daniel said, voice even. Front curtain. Threshold blackened. Window cracked. Cole's mouth flattened. Molotov, but lazy. Either a warning or an idiot. They found what they always find after men who, like threats, finish their art, a smear of boot oil on gravel, a tire pattern. Too common to be useful, a smear of spray paint half-finished on the siding by the porch. Not. We like. The writer had been surprised by his own courage and ran. Under the window glass, teeth glittered wetly. The rag was charred enough to lose its color, not its shape. Mary arrived wrapped in a robe, hair jammed under a scarf, fury blazing. Whoever did this, she said, hands on hips, owes me 3 new curtains and their front teeth. She looked at Daniel's soot-streaked forearms, softened, and touched his elbow like she was checking a fever. You good? I'm good, he said. And he was in the only ways that mattered, breathing, standing, not blaming himself for someone else's fire. That was new, and it surprised him enough to take note. By gray light yellow tape cut the porch. Folks clustered in small huddles, coffee mugs, steaming whispers chewing through the morning. Emma sat on the top stair in her hoodie, knees hugged tight, smudged with soot. She'd insisted on helping him wipe off the baseboards. Mary set a hand on her head. Emma leaned into it the way a kid leans into a tree they know will hold. The triumph came quiet, as if even the machine understood how to approach a wound. Ramona swung her leg over and stood very still at the curb helmet at her hip, eyes searching the char like it could answer. She looked smaller in the morning, stripped of night's glamour. She walked to the tape and stopped when Sheriff Cole lifted a palm. Stay there, Miss Steele. Her gaze cut to him, then to Daniel. Let me help. You can help by telling me why I found Merriweather Holdings scribbled on the back of a business card in a tire shop 2 towns over. Cole's voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't kind. They've been sniffing up and down this highway buying mom and pop for pennies and telling folks a storm is coming if they don't sell. That's not me, Ramona said. It was reflex, then truth tried to catch up. It used to be me, no. It used to be mine. I sold off. She stopped, swallowed. I thought I sold every piece that hurt people. Cole's stare didn't blink. Shell on top of prayer. Merriweather rolls up to Horizon Ridge Development, which rolls to Steel Horizon's capital. which rolls to a board with your name on it if you shake the tree hard enough. Ramona's shoulders lowered as if the accusation weighed what it should. Then I'll end it. Today. Emma stood, voice thin but clear. You brought the fire. Ramona flinched. No, she said, almost too fast. She tried again. No, sweetheart. But people who used to work for me, they carry old orders like they were still fresh. I didn't strike a match, but I built the room where the matches live. She dragged a sleeve across her cheek, then caught herself chin-lifting. I will shut them down. Daniel stepped off the porch and ducked beneath the tape, a small tool bag in his hand. He didn't look at anyone when he set a ladder under the sign. He climbed with the ease of a man who'd learned balance in places where falling cost more than a bruise. He pulled out sandpaper and began to work the black from the wood. Long strokes, even pressure. He didn't speak. He let the scratch carry the only sermon he owned. Ramona watched him a long time. Why aren't you angry? She asked finally, near the base of the ladder. Voice low enough that only he could hear. Anger, he said, sanding is a fire that feeds itself. I've lit enough of those. They meant to scare you. They don't know me. She stepped closer, the smell of leather and smoke and some expensive citrus at war with the damp ash. I'm sorry, she said. And the word wasn't a performance. It was a shape her mouth didn't recognize, but her heart did. For whatever thread of this still runs to me. He paused, looked down, and the weight in his eyes wasn't a stone he meant to throw. Promises are like signs, he said. Pretty to look at. What matters is what they point to. Then watch where mine points, she said. I'll show you. I'll sell land back. I'll cut anything that still bleeds people. I'll pull every paper nail out of this town. Start with Meriwether, Sheriff Cole said from the porch, as if he'd been part of the conversation all along. Publicly. Don't hide the apology in a footnote. Ramona nodded. Publicly. She pulled out her phone, then put it away. No. First with my own hands. She looked to Emma. May I help fix what they burned? Emma considered 9 years of kindness and caution sorting themselves. She held out a paper cup. Lemonade. Ramona took it with both hands, the way people take communion. Best thing I've tasted all year, she said, after a sip grimacing at the tart and grinning through it. Emma's mouth twitched. A treaty small and honest. By noon, the lot filled with trucks and men who knew how to fix things without lectures. A woman with a prosthetic leg and an old Marine emblem behind her ear arrived with a toolbox, set a brace beneath the frame, and said, Hold it there, and nobody argued. A retired teacher came with paint rollers. Frank Mallory brought replacement glass wrapped in a moving blanket. Said nothing and set to measuring. Mary laid out muffins on the hood of a pickup like the tailgate of a church picnic and cussed mildly when bees got ideas. Sheriff Cole had his jacket off and a hammer in his hand before anyone could pretend he wasn't going to. He tapped nails with the slow patience of a man who'd learned there were only 2 speeds that got the job done, steady and steadier. Inside, Emma stood on a chair and wiped smoke gray from the ceiling tiles with a sponge bigger than her palm. Bleeding that won't stop needs pressure, she whispered, repeating one of her dad's rules, and pressed harder where the stain held on. Ramona called 2 numbers that used to make men run. She didn't roar. She didn't threaten. She said names and dates and clauses, and when the line grew oily with excuses, she cut through it with one sentence, sell it back, or I call every state attorney within driving distance and drop the emails you thought you deleted. She hung up before the voice on the other end remembered how to be brave. Then she dialed another number, a nonprofit she'd funded on paper, but never touched with her hands. We're moving your headquarters to Willow Creek, she said. Today. Outside, Daniel kept sanding. The burned letters began to show their bones again. He switched to a finer grit-wiped dust with the back of his wrist, left a pale smear across the scabbed wood. He stopped before the black disappeared entirely. He didn't want it gone. He wanted it to tell the truth. Fire had come and fire had failed. Leave that he told Frank when the man lifted a rag to polish the ghost mark. You sure Frank asked? Scars can be beautiful, Daniel said. They tell you where you've been and that you're still here. Frank looked at him like a man looks at a map that suddenly makes sense. Still here, he echoed and smiled down into his mustache. By late afternoon, the new pane of glass sat snug in its frame. The threshold was scrubbed to a dark honesty. The sign came down, got a careful coat of oil, then went back up, catching the sun like a promise. The yellow tape slumped and was gathered. People drifted toward their cars with the content fatigue that builds when hands do what mouths can't. Sheriff Cole wiped his palms on his jeans and turned to Ramona. "You make good on the calls. They'll announce the divestments by sunrise," she said. "Merriweather's gone by week's end. If not, I'll burn the boardroom down legally. And I'll be here to say it." "Say it here," he said, tipping his chin toward the diner. "Not in Phoenix, not on a stage." She nodded. The admission itched at her spine, the good kind of discomfort. She wasn't used to belonging anywhere she couldn't buy. Today had cost her nothing except the thing that mattered most: control. Somehow, she felt richer. Evening slid in copper and honey. Emma set 3 paper cups on the step and drew a butterfly on each with a purple marker while they waited for the oil on the sign to dry. Daniel sat beside her, elbows on knees, hands stained with sawdust. Silence easy for the first time all day. Ramona lowered herself onto the stair at a respectful distance. "Thank you for letting me help," she said. "You didn't ask." Daniel said, not unkind. "I didn't know how," she admitted. "I'm learning." He nodded once. He didn't say good. He didn't say keep going. He didn't need to. Emma held out a cup to each of them. "To the sign," she said solemnly. "To the sign," Daniel echoed. "To the people who don't run from heat," Ramona added, and they touched Rim's lemonade clinking like soft bells. When the last ladder was stowed and the last truck door thumped shut, Daniel stood, stepped onto the porch, and looked up. "Welcome." All the sign read from its clean face, and in the bottom right corner a thumbprint of char framed in clear oil like a bruise under glass. He flicked the light. The neon hum thought about it, then glowed steady. Ramona watched his face in the wash of pink. "It suits you," she said. "It suits the town," he corrected, and his mouth made that almost smile that always looked like it had been earned at some cost. From the street, a motorcycle rolled by, slow, not stopping. A rider glanced over, saw the tape gone, and the glow back, and kept moving as if trouble had lost interest when it realized it couldn't set a table on fire and call that victory. Daniel locked the door for the night. He paused, hand on the key, and turned to Ramona. "Tomorrow breakfast, like always." And after breakfast, she asked. After breakfast, he said, eyes holding hers without flinching. "We see what your promises point to." He walked Emma to the truck, and Ramona stood on the sidewalk alone, staring at the sign until the letters blurred and sharpened again. Steel, she thought, isn't the only thing that keeps its shape after heat. Some people do too. She touched the butterfly on her wrist and felt it pulse like an answer. The sun came up over Willow Creek like a slow forgiveness bleeding gold across the roofs and painting the diner's polished sign in a honeyed glow. The scorch mark at its corner, small but visible, caught the morning light like a scar turned into jewelry. Daniel was already there when the first truckers rolled in boots damp from the dew coffee, brewing strong enough to be smelled from the parking lot. He moved behind the counter with the same quiet efficiency he once carried in field kitchens halfway around the world, measured deliberate steady. Emma sat at her usual post by the register, doodling butterflies in a spiral notebook, eyes bright, but still checking the windows now and again. Every slam of a car door made her shoulders lift, then settle. She wasn't frightened, not exactly just watchful, a habit that seeped into her bones the night the fire had come. The bell jingled, and in walked Ramona, not with the swagger of her first night, but with her helmet tucked under her arm like contrition itself. She wore no leather jacket today, only a soft flannel rolled at the sleeves and jeans that looked older than her fortune. For a second she hesitated just inside the door, like she was testing whether she was welcome. "Coffee?" Daniel asked from the counter, without looking up, voice even not unkind. Ramona let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and slid onto a stool. "Black," she said. "Strong." Emma glanced at her dad, then hopped down with a grin too big for her face. "We got muffins too, Mary says they're peace offerings." She held one up, chocolate chip still steaming. Ramona accepted it like it was a contract. "Best deal I've made in years." A couple of the truckers raised brows but said nothing. Folks in town had already heard about the fire, about Merriweather, about the way Ramona had picked up a hammer like she'd known what to do with it. Rumor spread fast, and redemption had to run to catch up. Sheriff Cole came in around 8, hat tucked under his arm, paperwork in his other hand. He nodded to Daniel, tipped his chin at Ramona. Got statements. Folks spotted a pair of boys in a rusted-out Dodge circling the block that night. One bragged too loud at the VFW bar last evening. We'll scoop him soon, local Daniel asked. Not quite, Cole said. Drifters, paid with prepaid cards traced back to Guess Who Merriweather's shell offices in Phoenix. They'll deny it, but I've seen enough to know a leash when I see one. Ramona didn't flinch. I'll cut it. Cole studied her, then grunted. Do it fast. This town doesn't need to keep looking over its shoulder. The door jingled again. This time it was Frank Mallory. Hands shoved deep in his jacket. He looked tired, like the night hadn't given him peace. He didn't sit. He stood by the door, gaze sweeping from Daniel to Ramona. You let her back in here after what her money tried to do, he asked, voice thick with something heavier than anger. Betrayal, maybe. The diner hushed. Even Emma froze, marker hovering above her notebook. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, met Frank's eyes. Her money's not her anymore. She's here. That's what matters. Does it? Frank's jaw tightened. Because I remember her name stamped on half the papers that near buried my garage. Didn't see her then. Ramona didn't snap back. She set her helmet on the counter, folded her hands, and spoke quiet enough that everyone leaned closer to hear. You're right. I wasn't here. I was too busy counting digits to notice the people bleeding underneath. I can't undo that, but I can damn well stop it now. I don't expect forgiveness, Frank. Just a chance to work. Frank studied her a long moment. His hand twitched like he might say more. Then he sighed through his nose and muttered, We'll see before sliding into a booth. Daniel poured him coffee without another word. That was the way in Willow Creek arguments cooled with caffeine and time not shouting. By midday, the diner was buzzing. Word had spread that Ramona Steele, yes, the Ramona Steele, was cooking eggs with Daniel, behind the counter, sleeves rolled, hair tied back. Laughter slipping loose when Emma corrected her spatula grip. Folks came just to see it, to measure for themselves whether this woman of headlines could fold into their small town without breaking it. Outside the scorch mark remained a dark whisper beneath the new paint. Kids whispered about the fire turning it into folklore already. But no one turned away from the diner. If anything, the lot filled faster. Later, when the rush settled, Daniel leaned on the counter, arms crossed, watching Ramona wipe down tables with Emma, skipping beside her, humming off key. He caught himself smiling, small, reluctant, but real. He wasn't used to letting his guard fall in daylight. Ramona caught him watching. What she asked, eyebrow arched. You don't look much like a billionaire right now, he said. She smirked. Good. I'd rather not. Silence stretched between them, comfortable as an old jacket. But under it pulsed something else, unspoken, fragile, the kind of thing that could either grow roots or burn out if pushed too fast. That evening, as the last light bled orange over the horizon, Ramona stood outside the diner staring at the sky. Daniel came out with a dish rag slung over his shoulder. You sticking around? He asked. I think I have to, she said. For once, not because of business, because I want to. She turned eyes, catching his. But tell me straight, Daniel, should I? He looked at her for a long beat, then at the sign glowing above them. Scars don't mean you run, they mean you stayed. So yeah, stay. She smiled, slow and certain. Then I will. And for the first time in years, the town of Willow Creek went to sleep with its neon sign glowing steady fire behind it, community before it, and the strangest alliance of all between a single dad veteran who wanted nothing but peace and a billionaire biker who had finally decided to fight for something worth keeping. The desert night had its own kind of silence, a low hum broken only by the chorus of cicadas and the occasional growl of a motorcycle cutting through the dark highway. Daniel lay awake on the couch, staring at the cracked ceiling. Emma had insisted he take the bed, but he hadn't. He rarely did. The couch was his post, the spot where he could keep watch, even in his sleep. But tonight wasn't like other nights. His mind replayed every word Ramona had said, every look in her eyes, every memory she'd unlocked. He could still see the butterfly tattoo, faded but clear like a secret message across time. He pressed a hand to his chest where the weight of that past still lingered. Emma stirred in her room. He listened for a while, her breathing steady before closing his eyes again. But rest didn't come. Only the echo of gunfire from years ago, only the cry of a little girl he thought he'd never see again. The next morning, Willow Creek woke to something unexpected. The diner wasn't just busy, it was packed. Word had spread like wildfire across county lines. Folks wanted to see it with their own eyes, the billionaire biker serving coffee in a dusty roadside diner standing shoulder to shoulder with a single dad veteran. Ramona showed up before sunrise, hair pulled back, boots dusty from a long ride. She didn't ask permission, she just grabbed an apron. Daniel didn't protest, though his eyes flicked at her with quiet amusement when she nearly burned the first stack of pancakes. "You flipped too soon," he said, sliding in beside her hand, brushing hers as he showed her the right way. She smirked. "Didn't realize pancakes had battlefield rules." "They do," he said flatly. "Timing and precision." Emma giggled from her stool at the counter. "You're teaching her like you taught me to ride my bike." Ramona raised a brow. "Bike." Emma grinned, holding up her notebook with a doodle of a pink bicycle. "Different kind of bike." The diner filled with laughter, easy, contagious, the kind that made strangers feel like friends. For the first time in years, Daniel realized his place wasn't just behind the grill. It was inside these moments, stitched into the rhythm of the town that had refused to let him disappear completely. By noon, a line formed outside. Reporters drawn by whispers arrived with cameras slung over shoulders, lenses hungry. Sheriff Cole came by, jaw tight. "They're sniffing around," he muttered to Daniel. "Said Merriweather's lawyers are filing claims trying to frame the fire as negligence. You know what that means, spin." Ramona stiffened. "He's not just trying to break me. He's trying to break this place." Cole nodded grimly. "Town's already choosing sides. Just be ready, he'll send more than lawyers next." Daniel felt the shift in the air the way soldiers feel when the wind changes before a fight. He leaned close to Ramona. "You ready for that?" Her jaw set. "I've been ready since I walked away from his boardroom." That evening, when the diner closed and the last truck rolled out of the lot, Daniel found Ramona sitting out back, staring at the horizon. A single lantern flickered between them, casting soft light across her face. "You ever think about what comes after?" she asked quietly. "After what?" "After the fight. After the noise. After people stop watching." Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded. "After is where the real work starts." She glanced at him, a ghost of a smile tugging her lips. "I used to think after meant climbing higher, buying more, proving something. Now I think it might just mean staying put." His eyes softened, though he said nothing. Ramona set her helmet on the ground, fingers brushing the scar across its edge. "You saved me once, Daniel, maybe without even meaning to. Now it feels like I'm supposed to save something too. Not companies, not money, just people." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Maybe that's why you came back." The desert breeze carried the smell of dust and wild sage. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world around them paused. Ramona's gaze lingered on him, steady searching, as if she were trying to read the story and the lines on his face. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "I'm not running again." Daniel nodded once, firm and sure. "Good. Because running doesn't heal anything." Emma's voice suddenly called from inside. "Dad? You coming?" Daniel pushed off the wall, but before he left, he caught Ramona's eyes once more. "Get some rest. Tomorrow won't be quiet." And as he stepped back inside, Ramona sat under the star's helmet at her side fire in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't riding alone. The first cool breath of morning slid along the hallway behind the diner, lifting the edge of a dusty tarp and sending the smell of old cardboard into the air. Daniel wedged his shoulder against the swollen door of the storage room and pushed until it surrendered with a tired groan. A rectangle of light fell across a chaos of forgotten things, busted chairs with one good leg. Each flour bag split and hardened like chalk. A cracked jukebox speaker. A stack of bent baking sheets. 3 boxes labeled Christmas in Mary's handwriting, and a cobweb hammock so elaborate it could have charged rent. Emma stood behind him with a broom twice her height. "Mission briefing?" she asked, eyes bright, chin lifted like the cadet she'd never been but was born to become. "Objective." Daniel said deadpan, "Clear, clean, and claim." For what? She peered around him, already choosing a corner. He studied the room, seeing past mess to shape. A place for people who need it, he said. A room that doesn't ask questions before it lets you sit down. Emma nodded solemnly. Codename Daniel considered. The bunker. Emma grinned. Copy that. By 7, Mary arrived with rubber gloves and a bandana tied pirate tight over her hair. I heard bunker, she announced, snapping on a glove. I brought lemon oil, a label maker, and righteous judgment. Righteous judgment? Emma asked. For these chairs, Mary said, pointing at the pile. We will separate the sheep from the goats. They set to work. Dust plumed. Cobwebs fell. Daniel hauled dead weight out the back door and to the dumpster, then paused at the old jukebox speaker, brushed grime from its face, and set it gently against the wall instead of throwing it. Some things earn another chance, he murmured. Emma swept with vigor, then stopped, staring at a patch of soot-dark stain that the mop never seemed to lighten. She knelt, pressed the sponge hard, whispering under her breath. Bleeding that won't stop needs pressure. The stain softened, broke, and finally surrendered. She smiled to herself, small and private. By 10, Sheriff Cole strolled in with a dolly and 3 milk crates of paperbacks. From a church rummage I raided, he said, not quite apologetic. Trauma memoirs, decent thrillers, and 1 copy of Hatchet, because a kid left it in the back of my cruiser in '09, and I figure it belongs here now. He set the crates down and leaned his shoulder into the same door jamb Daniel had fought earlier, testing the frame, imagining a world where hinges shut softly. We could put a bookshelf right here, he said. Somewhere you see it the second you sit, so you know words live here too. Amen, Mary said, hauling a mop bucket past like a tugboat. 2 veterans arrived close together, neither calling ahead. The first was the woman with the Marine emblem tucked behind her ear, prosthetic leg clicking softly against tile. Name's Tasha, she said, shaking Daniel's hand with a grip that said she didn't need introductions to be believed. She turned to Emma. You're the XO. Emma looked to her dad. She is, he confirmed. Tasha saluted Emma, crisp and ridiculously serious. Emma returned the salute, a tiny figure with a broom for a rifle, and something in the room exhaled. The second was a man in his 30s with eyes that flinched at doorways and a cap pulled too low to be fashion. He didn't introduce himself. He set a cardboard box on the table and slid it toward Daniel with a nod. Inside a Purple Heart replica coin, a desert dry letter sealed and addressed. To whoever needs this next, and a photograph curled at the edges. 3 men in camo sitting on a hood under a sky that looked like it had inhaled sand and forgot how to let go. For the wall, the man said. If there is one. There will be, Daniel said. By noon, Frank Mallory backed his pickup to the back door and lowered a narrow bookcase from the bed with exaggerated care, the way a man handles a thing he's decided will matter before anyone else understands why. From my garage, he muttered. Used to hold carb cleaner and manual sets. Seems like it wants better. They fitted it beneath the window. Mary wiped it with lemon oil until it glowed like it had been waiting for this all along. Sheriff Cole took the boxes and began alphabetizing with the ruthlessness of a librarian who decided redemption could be organized if you tried hard enough. Tasha brought in 2 folding chairs from her trunk and declared them combat tested. Emma stuck a strip of label tape to each one. Sit, stay, heal. It was Emma who found the napkins. They'd been stuffed in a crooked drawer beneath an old microwave, a brick of off-white squares with edges slightly warped by time. She pulled one free, smoothed it on the table, and started folding corner to corner, press fold again, triangle turn, pockets. A bird shape slowly appearing because her hands remembered the YouTube video she'd watched 6 months ago and then once a week since. When she finished, a small crane sat in her palm, lopsided but sturdy. She chewed her lip, then pulled a purple marker from her pocket and wrote on its wing in careful print for Dad's friends. Thank you. She set it on the bookcase between a paperback about a long walk home and a memoir with desert on the cover. Mary saw it first. Her mouth softened into a smile that made her look 10 years younger. Oh, honey, she whispered. Tasha after that. She picked it up as if it might break, then passed it to the quiet man with the cap. He turned it over, thumb tracing the crease, and something in his face loosened like a knot that had given up resisting. He set it back and without a word reached for a napkin. By closing, 5 cranes roosted along the shelf, white wings edged in fingerprints, each one bearing different handwriting on the wing. Still here, for the ones who didn't. Because you pulled me out, because somebody will need a bird someday. Semper Fi. Ramona arrived as the sun tilted toward evening. She paused in the doorway, helmet under one arm, the other hand empty, the rarest thing she ever carried. Dust motes drifted in the angled light like small forgivenesses. The room smelled like lemon oil and old paper, and the metallic hint of a mop bucket at rest. She stepped inside quietly, as if volume itself could break the spell. No entourage, no swagger. She stopped in front of the shelf and stared at the cranes, at the coins, at a dog tag loop someone had left on a nail. She reached toward a photo, a black and white of a young Marine kissing a baby through the wire of a base fence, and didn't touch it, choosing to let it be. This is... She groped for a word that money had never taught her. Holy, she finished, voice small. Room's still a room, Mary said, snapping tape into the label maker. People make it holy. Ramona's eyes found Daniel. He stood near the back, hands on his hips, watching without managing a presence, without a demand. People moved around him as if he had arranged gravity to be gentler in this square of the world. How did you do this in a day? She asked. I didn't, he said. They did. I unlocked a door. And you kept it open, she said. He shrugged, but the corner of his mouth shifted, the barest acknowledgement that he had, yes, chosen to keep it open, even while every instinct trained by years of ambushes told him to barricade it. After the dinner rush, when the diner's front room quieted to clinks and low talk, the bunker breathed on its own. 2 men came in separately, sat in chairs on opposite sides of the room, stared at the same middle distance for 10 minutes, and then began somehow to talk. Not about war at first. About carburetors. About a high school gym that used to leak in the southwest corner whenever it rained. About a dog named Tiger who'd been a coward except when it counted. Words built like scaffolding around a subject neither man wanted to climb yet. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor near the bookcase, folding another crane, listening without seeming to a child in the presence of the kind of truth adults usually hide from them. She wrote on the wing, still fighting, still healing, still here. She held it up without ceremony. For the wall, she said. What wall? One of the men asked, smiling despite himself. The one we're going to build, she said, as if it were already fact, with pictures and words and things people can touch. Sheriff Cole passed the doorway and heard the decree. Well, he said, I guess we're building a wall, Hall Mary corrected, pointing the label maker like a judge's gavel. Hall of Honor sounds less like prison. Hall of Honor? Emma repeated, testing the words as if they were bricks checking their weight. Okay. They found the space for it, an expanse of clean wall just beyond the doorway, where anyone entering had to pass slowly enough to see. Frank produced a box of thumbtacks. Tasha hammered 2 nails with the efficient thwack of a woman who had put up tents in windstorms. The quiet man with the cap took off the cap, revealed hair cut too recently to be fashion, and pinned up a Polaroid of himself holding a sign Mary had scrawled with a Sharpie, still fighting. He stared at the word a long time, then turned the sign over and wrote in smaller letters beneath it, Still here. Others followed. A boy home on leave with his jaw too tight for his age. An old man with hands swollen from arthritis and regret. A woman who didn't serve, but loved someone who had, and carried that service inside her bones like a second skeleton. Emma snapped their pictures on a cheap instant camera Ramona fetched from the back of her SUV, the kind of spontaneous purchase billionaires could make with one hand, and for once the exact right one. Ramona paid for nothing in this room with money. She paid with stillness. She stood next to the shelf and did something so radical for her that her bones ached with it. She didn't speak. She held a paper cup of coffee and watched the way Daniel moved without commanding, the way he deflected praise like it were a ball tossed too hard, the way he asked a man if he wanted the chair near the window because the door at his back might feel like a cliff, the way his hand, scarred steady, set a coin on the shelf without saying whose pocket it had warmed for years. He didn't identify trauma or offer advice. He adjusted a lamp so the corner wasn't dark. He asked someone if they wanted decaf. He nodded at stories without reaching to fix them. The room took its rhythm from that restraint. And Ramona, who had spent a life filling space so no one could crowd her out of it, felt the ground under her tilt, not in the dizzy way of power, but in the steady way of definition. This was the man who had carried her out of the ruins, not just because he had strength in his arms, but because he had a kind of humility that made other people brave. She stepped to the doorway and watched him from the hall unseen. His profile in the lamplight made a sculpture out of fatigue and usefulness. She pressed 2 fingers against the butterfly on her wrist. "You," she whispered, not for the first time. "It was always you." Later, when the last dish clinked and the last chair stretched its legs, Daniel turned out the front room lights and let the bunker glow by itself, one lamp soft and amber making islands of warmth. Emma yawned big enough to crack her face and leaned against him. He rested his hand on her hair. "Good work today," he said. "XO reporting mission success," she mumbled. "Tomorrow," he said, "we add shelves." "And cookies," Mary called from the doorway. "Healing requires carbohydrates." Tasha saluted again, a promise. The quiet man with the cap touched the brim like a thank you, then slipped out the back into a night that looked less like a wall and more like a road. Ramona lingered. "I don't know how to leave this room," she admitted to Daniel. "I want to take it with me." "You don't," he said. "You let it take you." She breathed out a small surrender. "Then I'll be back in the morning," he nodded. "The door will be open." When she finally stepped into the parking lot, the stars had muscled through what was left of the twilight. The diner's sign hummed its pink hymn. Ramona swung her leg over the bike and didn't start it. She sat with the helmet in her lap, feeling the desert press softly against her, and understood with the kind of certainty that doesn't ask permission she hadn't come here to fix a place. She'd come to be remade by it. Inside, Daniel locked up and stood for a moment in the doorway to the bunker. 5 cranes had become 12. On the shelf next to Hatchet and a book with a helicopter on the cover, Emma's newest bird rested, its wing inscription catching the lamplight. Still fighting, still healing, still here. He touched the paper just enough to steady it, then turned out the lamp. Darkness didn't crowd the room. It simply tucked it in. The next morning carried the smell of rain that had failed to fall, a scent of dust that wanted to be mud, but never got the chance. Daniel walked up Main Street with Emma skipping ahead, her backpack bouncing like she was heading to school instead of a construction site made of secondhand furniture and faith. The sun was low, warm enough to make the diner's windows glow, but not yet hot enough to make the air feel like punishment. When he unlocked the back door, the bunker greeted them with the faint sweetness of lemon oil and the hush of potential. The paper crane sat quietly on the shelf, a dozen folded witnesses waiting for more company. Emma saluted them as she passed. "Morning, squad," she whispered. XO Daniel called softly. "Inspection." She marched in, broom tucked under her arm like a rifle. She stopped at the bookcase at the wall where the Polaroids had started to gather at the folding chairs lined neatly, like soldiers who'd decided to sit this one out. She nodded once. Secure, but needs expansion. Mary arrived not long after, carrying a box labeled in Sharpie, coffee, and courage. "Donation," she said, setting it on the table with a grunt. "Some from me, some from the church. There's a crock pot too, thought we could keep soup warm in here. People open up better when their stomachs aren't gnawing on them." Emma clapped her hands. "Cookies yesterday, soup today. We're going to win the war." Daniel caught her eye and winked. "We always do." By mid-morning, the room was busier than the diner's front. Sheriff Cole leaned in the doorway, nursing a mug, watching as a lanky man in his 40s paced the length of the floor. His name was Rick, though he hadn't offered it until Emma asked directly. He'd served 2 tours in Iraq and hadn't figured out how to stop walking since. He wore a jacket despite the heat hands shoved deep in the pockets, eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds like it might vanish. "Door stays open," Daniel told him quietly. "No one's going to shut it on you." Rick nodded, but didn't sit. He circled again, wearing a track into the freshly swept floor, muttering under his breath. Emma followed once like a shadow, then broke off to fold another crane. She scribbled, "Rest easy when you're ready," on its wing, and left it where Rick would have to pass it. He stopped once, glanced at the bird, frowned, then moved on. But his steps slowed. Not long after Tasha arrived, hauling in 2 heavy duffel bags. She dumped them on the table with a thud. "Gear," she explained. "Blankets, candles, a set of dominoes, and a Bluetooth speaker if someone wants music that isn't jukebox ghosts." Emma dug into the first bag like it was treasure. "Dominoes," she cheered. Dad, can we play later? Daniel smiled. Later. Mary, watching him, muttered, You mean after the world stops needing you every 5 seconds? The word slid into him, half sting, half truth. He bent to adjust a chair and didn't answer. By noon, Ramona appeared not in leather and thunder this time, but in jeans and a plain white shirt. Her hair was still wind mussed, but she carried a tray of sandwiches from a bakery 2 towns over. Peace offering, she said. Don't ask how much I overpaid. Emma's eyes widened. Turkey with cranberries, she asked hopefully. Ramona smirked. And roast beef with horseradish. And a couple vegetarian because Mary told me someone would ask. Mary raised her hand. That someone is me. They laughed, and the sound held longer than it should have, filling the room like light through a cracked roof. The bunker grew louder as the afternoon went on. People trickled in, some veterans, some just lonely, some curious. A teenage boy with a buzz cut sat cross-legged against the wall, pretending not to listen to Rick's pacing, but slowly matching his rhythm. A widow named June brought a framed photo of her husband in uniform and set it under the Hall of Honor, whispering, He was never good at being alone. Maybe he won't be now. Every addition deepened the room like each object was a stone laid in a foundation, and Daniel, moving among them, felt the floor steady under his feet in a way it hadn't for years. But not everyone approved. Frank Mallory showed up just before dinner, grease still on his hands from the garage. He leaned against the door jamb, arms crossed, watching. His eyes narrowed when he saw the Polaroids, the cranes, the laughter that spilled too easily for a place full of people with broken nights. You're turning this into something it can't be, he muttered. Daniel looked up. What's that a cure? Frank's voice was flat. This room, these cranes, this soup, it doesn't erase what's burned into us. You know that. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. Not a cure. A place to breathe. Frank shook his head. Places don't change anything. People leave here, the dark follows. Ramona stepped forward, eyes sharp. And yet you're standing in the doorway. Frank scowled, then looked away, ashamed at being caught. He mumbled something about needing to drop off tools and left before anyone could stop him. Emma whispered, He's wrong, right? Daniel crouched, resting his hand on her shoulder. He's hurting. And when people hurt, sometimes they talk like hope is a trick. Doesn't mean he's right. Emma folded her lips tight, then picked up another napkin. Then I'll make him one too, she said fiercely. A crane that says hope isn't fake. By evening, the bunker had taken on a hum of its own. Someone had plugged in Tasha's speaker and low blues filled the corners. June passed soup around. Rick finally sat, his shoulders sagging like a tent pole released. Emma handed him his crane without a word. He held it a long time, then set it on the table in front of him like a fragile shield. Ramona watched from her chair near the shelf, eyes darting to Daniel more than the room. She saw the way people orbited him without him trying, the way he offered presents instead of solutions, the way even Frank Angry Resistant couldn't stay away for long. When the last stragglers left and the soup pot was empty, Daniel sat heavily on a folding chair, elbows on his knees. It's growing faster than we can hold it, he admitted. Mary, stacking bowls, said, That's what happens when people taste something real. They come hungry. Emma curled against his side, eyelids heavy. Then we just keep feeding them, she mumbled. Ramona met his eyes across the dim room. You can't do it alone, she said softly, and you don't have to. Daniel said nothing, but his hand on Emma's shoulder tightened just enough to show he'd heard. Outside, the night gathered again, thick and starless. But inside the bunker glowed lamps, warm paper cranes, multiplying walls, holding stories like wounds stitched but not hidden. The storm finally came that night, not in lightning or thunder, but in headlights. Around midnight, 2 black SUVs rolled slow down Main Street, their engines low, their windows dark as mirrors. The diner's lights were off, the bunker locked, but Daniel saw them from his porch. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Just stood with his arms folded across his chest until the cars slid past like shadows. Ramona had warned him. Merriweather wouldn't just let her walk away. She had stolen too much power, loyalty, and the chance to prove himself the only hand on the wheel. That meant sooner or later his reach would stretch as far as Willow Creek. The next morning, Sheriff Cole confirmed it. He showed up at the diner with circles under his eyes and a crumpled report in his hand. New faces at the edge of town, he said grimly. Men who don't ask for coffee, don't rent rooms, just sit in their cars and watch. Emma listened her toast halfway to her mouth. Bad men, she asked. Cole hesitated. Daniel stepped in. Men who don't belong. That's all you need to know. Ramona, sitting at the counter, crushed her napkin into a ball. He's moving faster than I thought. Daniel looked at her. What's his angle? She exhaled sharply. Control. If he can't scare me back to the table, he'll scorch earth until I have nowhere else to stand. Then he'll find out this town doesn't scare easy, Cole said, but his voice held worry. By noon, the bunker was busy again. Rick returned less restless but still pacing. June brought sandwiches this time, saying she wanted to pull her weight. Tasha strung up a strand of fairy lights she'd stolen from her cousin's wedding decorations, laughing as Emma clapped and declared it officially magical. But the air carried something heavier than laughter could dissolve. People whispered about the cars on the highway, about strangers at the gas station, about what it meant when billionaires aimed their shadows at small towns. Daniel stayed calm. He brewed coffee, fixed a leaking pipe, nodded to each new face that walked through the door. But when Ramona caught him alone in the back, she saw his jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked stone. You're holding it together for them, she said softly. Someone has to. Her eyes searched his. And who holds it for you? He didn't answer. He just adjusted the wrench and walked past her. That evening, as the last of the guests drifted out, headlights cut across the lot. Two men stepped out, suited clean, but with the kind of stillness that made Daniel's skin crawl. They walked inside without knocking eyes, sweeping the room like auditors counting ghosts. Mr. Hayes, one of them said smoothly, fixing his gaze on Daniel. And Ms. Vega. We've been asked to deliver a message. Ramona's hand curled around the back of a chair. Say it quick. The man smiled without warmth. Mr. Merriweather regrets your recent choices. He believes you may be confused. He offers you one more opportunity to reconsider, to return what belongs to him, to abandon this charade. His eyes flicked to the cranes, the photos, the soup pot, and to stop involving others in your rebellion. Daniel stepped forward, broad shoulders filling the space between Ramona and the strangers. This isn't a charade, it's a community. The man's smile faltered. Communities burn. Don't make him prove it. Sheriff Cole emerged from the hallway, hand resting on his belt near his holster. You've delivered your message. Now deliver yourselves back out of my county. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the man inclined his head slightly. We'll be in touch. They turned and left their SUV rolling away silent as smoke. Emma peeked out from behind the counter, eyes wide. Dad, are they gonna hurt us? Daniel crouched, pulling her close. Not while I'm breathing. Ramona's chest tightened at his words, at the weight of them, because she knew Merriweather well enough to understand he'd test that vow soon. Later, when the diner was locked and Emma finally asleep, Daniel and Ramona sat on the porch, silence heavy between them. The crickets hummed, but the night air felt brittle. You should have told me sooner, Daniel said at last. She flinched. About Merriweather. About how far he'd go. Her eyes glistened in the dark. I didn't want to drag you into it. He turned his head sharply, his voice low but fierce. You think you dragged me, Ramona? This isn't about choice anymore. You're here. Emma's here. That means I'm in it. She swallowed hard, staring at the ground. For the first time, the unshakable steel in her posture cracked. I don't know if I can protect anyone from him. Daniel leaned closer, his voice rough with old fire. Then it's a good thing I'm not anyone. He pulled the collar of his shirt down just far enough for the lamplight to catch the edge of his tattoo, the eagle, the anchor, the globe. The Corps trained me for men like him. Ramona's breath caught. She wanted to argue, to tell him this wasn't his war, but the conviction in his eyes was iron. And deep down, she knew if Merriweather came for them, Daniel Hayes wouldn't just stand his ground. He'd make the ground itself rise to meet him. They'd called him Mr. Hayes the night before, wrong name, wrong man, on purpose, so that later in any sworn statement, nothing would quite line up. But Daniel Harlow read the tactic for what it was, a veil thrown over a threat. And at 4:17 a.m., when the back door of Lena's joint creaked open and the chilly hour before dawn reached its hand inside the veil, tore. The first thing he saw was the neat stack of napkins Emma had left for morning, folded squares aligned like a formation, and her pink backpack still hanging from the peg by the coat rack. The second thing he saw was absence. The empty stool, the half-finished drawing on the counter, a cartoon sun wearing a smile that suddenly felt like a lie. His voice didn't carry panic. It carried inventory. He checked the bathroom, the kitchen, the unlocked broom closet she sometimes turned into a fortress with a book and a flashlight. He stepped outside into air that smelled of metal and mesquite and the faint stink of old gasoline. Gravel wore the fresh scars of spinning tires. Beyond the dumpster, a shoe print small, deep at the toe, like someone had been pulled rather than run. He crouched, eyes tracing the pattern. Not Emma's tread. Another kid's. He tracked it 2 spaces over where a second set of prints, men's, overran the small ones and then vanished where the lot met the road. Sheriff Cole answered on the first ring voice, sleep rough. Maddox. Emma's gone, Daniel said. Back door was jimmied, 2 sets of adult tracks, one smaller a kid. They left in a hurry. Cole slid into the sheriff's tone like a blade. I'm rolling. They used the wrong name yesterday, Daniel added. It was deliberate. They're staging confusion. Where? Cole asked. Daniel's eyes went out past town to where the old freight yard sat like a rusting memory against the pale line of dawn. He didn't say, I know. He said, I'll call you when I have eyes. Daniel. But the line clicked dead. The next call was to Ramona. She answered on the second buzz, breathless, though he could hear road quiet around her. Tell me it isn't. It is, he said. Stay at the diner. If those SUVs circle back, I want a witness with a camera and a spine. A beat of silence. I won't stay put. You will tonight, he said, not unkind. Please, long breath. Bring her home. He didn't hang up until he heard the words. In the tiny back hall, he set the key to the steel locker and turned it. Hinges complained softly. Inside hung the life he had taught himself to keep asleep. Olive drab shirt, pressed flat, tactical belt, with a trauma kit clipped where his hand would find it. In the dark, a headlamp, a field knife wrapped in oiled cloth, 2 coil zip ties, a folded map of the county with pencil notes around the freight yard. He shrugged into the shirt, laced his boots, strapped the belt, with the same efficient motion he'd used 1,000 times where bad nights demanded good hands. Last he touched the dog tags once, not wearing them, just letting the cool metal kiss his palm. Still here, he told the ghosts. Work to do. The town was black glass when he left the stars paling at their edges. He parked a 1/4 mile out from the yard and walked in along the ditched dry grass, whispering against his calves. The freight yard rose from the flat like a ribcage angles of corrugated siding, stacked shipping containers with graffiti faded to hieroglyphs, a single bulb over the main warehouse door coughing light into the dark. He stopped and let stillness map the scene. 2 men at the front entrance pretending not to shiver. One patrolling the north fence with the bored gait of a man who thought his job beneath him. Another shadow moving slow along the warehouse rafters, a cigarette coal flaring against the gloom every time he dragged. Inside the big bay, he could make out the shape of a camping lantern flickering on a crate. Voices carried thin and echoing. He counted 3, maybe 4. Joints were always sloppier than they sounded behind tinted glass. He checked wind, inhaling, exhaling. He noted the scrap piles, the rickety staircase, the skid marks where someone had earlier spun a gravel donut to look tough for no one. He traced a path in his mind up the southwest wall via a rusted ladder across the catwalk, down behind the office shed angle to the lantern. He adjusted his belt and moved. He didn't run. Running is a loud sport. He flowed boot falls, set down heel-quiet shoulders, threading the gaps a younger man would have muscled. At the base of the ladder, he looked up, checked for oil slick on the rung, then climbed hand over hand. Halfway, a rivet gave a complaint squeal. He paused, breath riding high in his chest. Waited for silence to knit itself back together. The cigarette coal in the rafters flared, then disappeared. He kept climbing. He slid under the lip of the roof, belly crawled a yard, and peered through a broken pane into the open floor below. Emma. She sat on a crate near the lantern's glow ankles, bound with silver duct tape, wrists tied in front rather than behind. Her chin was up in that mule-stubborn way he recognized from the time she'd declared she could carry the gallon of milk by herself, and then did. A boy sat beside her, maybe 8, his pant leg dark at the thigh with blood. Emma's hands worked a torn t-shirt into a bandage, fingers quick and small. "You're okay," she whispered. "Calm, present. It's just a graze. Bleeding stops with pressure. Stay with me. Breathe in slow." He couldn't hear the boy's reply. He didn't need to. He knew the cadence of fear the way a kid tries to swallow it and ends up choking on it anyway. He tracked the room a man named Riggs boots too clean. Jaw doing that grind that means meth has rented a room upstairs, stalked in a circle, cracking his knuckles for an audience that wasn't impressed. Two flunkies against the far wall tried to look like they weren't scared of their boss. A third man lounged by the stairs, phone in his hand, eyes skittering like roaches from light. Daniel lifted 2 fingers, then 3, then flashed 1. Old hand signals that meant count, mark, move. He gave himself the green light and went. He slid through the window onto the catwalk, tested the grating with his weight, then took 3 silent steps and dropped behind the office box, a plywood cube raised like a dollhouse with one missing wall. He eased to the corner. Below, Riggs barked something about leverage, about men who didn't know their place. Emma didn't look at him. She looked at the boy, her small hands tightening the knot just enough, her father's mantra laid like a steadying palm over the moment. Stay calm. Stay smart. Stay kind. The first flunky peeled off to the far side to pee into a dark corner phone tucked between shoulder and ear. Daniel ghosted behind him, palm fitting into the notch under the jaw forearm. Closing, carotid, slow, like a dimmer switch, the man slumped unconscious but alive. He eased him down between crates and looped his wrists with a zip tie. Didn't gloat. Didn't linger. The work was motion, not theater. He stepped back into shadow as the rafters guard moved the cigarette ember, reappearing like a warning light. Daniel waded through 3 drags, mapped the man's rhythm, then timed his advance to the lull between inhalations. A hand a twist, a muffled grunt, and the guard lay stretched on the catwalk, a borrowed hoodie tugged over his eyes. Second zip tie. Second breath he let himself take deeper. On the floor, Riggs drew closer to Emma, crouching to her eye level. "Your old man coming yet, princess?" he sneered. "We're making a show tonight." Emma stared at his chin, not his eyes. "Doesn't feed a man like that." Her voice was steady. "He's already here." Riggs chuckled, looked around as if to receive the applause he thought the universe owed him. "Yeah. Where behind you?" she said, not even turning. Riggs spun reflexively, and that instinct, that cheap movie reflex, cost him. Daniel dropped from the catwalk like a shadow losing patience. He landed on bent knees, shock absorbed, and when Riggs lunged with a sloppy haymaker, Daniel slid inside the arc forearm, meeting bicep palm striking ribs. Breath left Riggs in a hot grunt. He swung again. Daniel stepped, turned the momentum, and laid him across a steel post with the kind of force that knocks courage clean out of men who only ever had borrowed courage in the first place. The 2 flunkies of the wall reacted like men who had never trained a reaction. The first charged with his chin out. Daniel pivoted one hand to the back of the head, one to the elbow, guiding him into the concrete with a thud and a soft curse. The second fumbled for the pistol, tucked too far back in his waistband. Daniel's boot kicked the gun away before fingers found a grip. He faced him flat-footed, a hand up. "Don't," he said, tone calm enough to sound like reason. The man hesitated a second too long. Daniel stepped in and ended the conversation with an elbow to the sternum. He kept it measured, just enough pain to end ideas. "Dad." Emma's voice burst as both relief and order. "He's bleeding." Daniel went to one knee at the boy's side. "Hey, champ." He checked the wound, a crease from a ricochet or shrapnel lateral across the thigh. Sloppy work by men who had meant to scare, not to make a tragedy they couldn't afford. He stripped a sterile pad from his kit, tucked it under Emma's already good pressure dressing, and nodded. "You did perfect," he said. "Not holds. Now we wrap and carry." Behind him, Riggs rolled onto an elbow, stupid, still reaching for anything with edges. Daniel turned his head just enough. "Don't," he repeated. This time the warning carried winter in it. Riggs froze. Footsteps scuffed at the far door. Daniel's gaze snapped to the shadow that filled the frame, and then stopped when the figure lifted both hands, empty. Ramona. She stood just inside the light helmet, dangling from 2 fingers' chest, rising like she'd run the last 100 yards because she had. Her eyes found Emma first and did the thing a mother's eyes do even when the mouth hasn't learned the label yet, counting fingers searching for blood that wasn't there, inventorying breath. Then her eyes found Daniel, and for a second the whole freight yard shrank to the space between the three of them. "I told you to stay put," Daniel said, not looking away from the room. "I'm not built that way," she answered, voice shaking but gun steady. He made a decision in the way men like him do, at the speed of a flinch, with the weight of a plan. "There's a stair behind that office," he said, chin flicking. "Clear it. If anyone comes through the north door, you sing out once. Don't step into the open." She nodded and moved, not arguing, not posturing, just doing. He slid his arms under the boy and tested the lift. "Arms around my neck, buddy. Your light is a story." The kid complied, face scrunched, but trust, hand over hand to Emma's calm. Daniel stood and felt the boy's weight settle into old muscles that remembered 1,000 carries in one. You never forget a child from rubble's small arms loop tight smoke in your throat, the world trying to fall around you and failing because you did not let it. He turned to Emma. "Climb," he said. "Stay on my left. If I say down, you get small and you stay." She nodded once, jaw set. They moved. The warehouse wasn't a maze, but it was the kind of place that had decided mazes were prettier and tried to copy one from television. Daniel took the aisle that gave him glimpses of 3 angles at once. He held corners wide, kept bodies behind him instead of ahead. At the stair, Ramona stood with one hand on the railing, eyes on the north door, breath hitching but mind clear. He didn't touch her. He touched the situation instead, adjusting the lantern with his foot to throw longer shadows where he needed them. At the landing, the rafters guard woke, groaned under his hoodie and rolled. Daniel paused, bent, and tugged the fabric free enough so the man could breathe proper. "Don't follow," he said softly. The man nodded, shame flushing his cheek. Down the last stretch, gravel bit under their boots. Dawn was painting the horizon with a thin brush, now line of pewter, brightening to tin. A siren far off started and stopped the sheriff closing distance without broadcasting it to anyone with ears. At the back gate, chain link rattled like pennies in a jar. The padlock had been cut once and fixed badly. He twisted it with his fingers and it gave like a confession. He eased Emma through, then the boy into Ramona's arms, and that image that practiced woman receiving a wounded child like she had all her life been waiting for the chance to do exactly that, blew a crater in her composure. Tears lifted and held, but did not fall. "Not yet." 2 minutes, Daniel said. "North fence will have one more. He'll see our tracks and come curious." Ramona nodded. "You want loud from me?" "Not unless you mean it," he said, and it was almost a smile. They cut low across the gravel toward the wash where he'd parked. Behind them, the warehouse breathed old air and new fear. Ahead, mesquite made a scribble against brightening sky. Emma kept pace, breathing like he'd taught her 2 steps inhale, 2 steps exhale, counting, without counting. She reached up once without looking and found Ramona's free hand. Fingers threaded. Neither of them commented on it because there are things you don't name as they are happening. You let them become. At the ditch, Daniel slid down first, receiving the boy again, setting him gently in the shadow. He boosted Emma, then turned back to scan the ridge. A figure moved at the warehouse door, small in the distance, curious, not shooting. "Good." He cupped his hands around his mouth and sent a sound across the scrub that only a few men in the county would know, a short, sharp whistle with the sheriff's tag in it. 3 beats later, the echo returned from somewhere to the west. Cole was closer than the siren said. Of course he was. Almost home. Daniel told the kids, and Emma's mouth wobbled, but held the little boy clutching her sleeve like it was the rope that kept the world from slipping. Ramona crouched beside him. Her breath finally breaking into a sob she strangled to quiet. She pressed her lips to the boy's dusty hair, then to the back of Emma's hand, then to nothing, just air. Because there are prayers you can't make words for, when the person you love is inches from being lost, and then is not. The first squad car eased slow across the berm lights, off a shape more than a presence. Sheriff Cole slid out, hand-raised eyes, sweeping, assessing, landing, last on the child, and then on Emma, and then finally on Daniel. He nodded once. The corners of his mouth tugged into a grim smile that said, "You did it," without making me fill out the bad forms. Daniel let himself breathe for real. The night let go of his shoulders. In the east, the sky cracked open and color poured through bleached orange mean pink, a white-hot line where sun would be. He looked down at his daughter, dirt streaked across her cheek chin, set like his fingers still twined with Ramona's without anybody telling them to be. He filed the picture in the part of his mind where he kept the ones that saved him when the ghosts came. "Let's go home," he said. He stood, took the boy again and started up out of the ditch toward the car that would carry them back down the road past the rust and the empty threats toward the neon sign that would be on because he had decided it would be. Behind them, the freight yard watched, furious and small, and learned something it should have known already. Some people aren't leverage, they're anchors, and you don't move an anchor with a match. The diner's bell rang at 8 in the morning. Not with the lazy clatter of a weekday customer, but sharp, purposeful, like the world wanted to announce they made it back. Daniel pushed the door with his shoulder, carrying the boy still swaddled in borrowed blankets. Emma walked just ahead, her small fingers clenched around Ramona's. The sheriff followed, eyes scanning the street out of habit hand, never far from the radio clipped to his vest. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon grease hit like a wave familiar grounding. People were already seated, truckers with weather-creased faces, 2 teachers in weekend denim, old man Rivera at his window booth with the crossword he never finished. All heads turned and silence landed like snow on a quiet morning. Then chairs-scraped coffee cups were abandoned and the town rose. "Lord Almighty," someone whispered. "They're back." Emma climbed onto a stool, her backpack retrieved by Lena from its hook. She sat straight, chin lifted, as if refusing to let anyone see how near she'd come to the edge. The boy name was Joel, they learned in soft syllables, stayed tucked against Daniel's side, not ready for eyes. Sheriff Cole cleared his throat, voice roughened by no sleep. "Found him at the old freight yard. Alive. Which is more than those fools deserve to manage." His glance slid to Daniel, and the weight of respect was there, unsaid but solid. Questions came fast. Who were they? What did they want? How many? The sheriff raised a palm. "We'll sort the noise later. Right now the kids need quiet and gratitude. Let's start with that." Ramona eased onto the stool beside Emma, one hand never leaving the girls. The other wiped quick at the corner of her eye. She turned to Daniel, voice low so only he could hear. "You carried all of us out of there. Don't argue, you know you did." Daniel didn't answer. He busied himself with pouring water into a chipped glass, setting it in front of Emma, adjusting Joel's blanket. He knew words, but sometimes words only made the truth wobble. The town's pastor, Reverend Hanks, stepped forward, not in his pulpit suit, but in overalls grease stains on the cuffs. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "The good book says there's no greater love than laying down one's life. You didn't just lay it down, you walked into the fire to drag 2 children out." Daniel shook his head. "I did what a father does. Nothing more." But the murmur in the diner said otherwise. To them, he'd done what no one else could have. Cole leaned near voice for Daniel alone. "They'll rebuild their crew, you know, the kind that doesn't like being embarrassed. You may have bought peace for a week, maybe 2. Not forever." Daniel sipped the untouched coffee someone had set in front of him. His eyes went to Emma, who was coaxing Joel into sipping water, her tone soothing, steady, a reflection of him. "Forever's too big a word," he said quietly. "I'll take today." Ramona's hand covered his wrist. "You don't have to take it alone." That night, after the sheriff had posted deputies at the freight yard and the town had emptied the diner of rumor and worry, Daniel and Emma sat outside under the weak neon light. The air smelled of rain that wasn't yet falling. Emma leaned against him, her cheek pressing the seam of his shirt. "You knew where I was," she said. Not a question, an anchor of fact. "I did." How Daniel looked out at the dark street the way it swallowed sound. "Because you're my girl, I'll always know." Emma thought on that, then whispered, "I told him you were behind him. He believed me." That made Daniel smile small and sharp. "Good. Fear listens to truth when it comes from the steady ones." Her hand found his. She held my hand the whole way back. He didn't need to ask who. He just nodded, thumb brushing her knuckles. Across town, lights flickered in houses where men plotted how to regain the ground they'd lost. At the freight yard, shadows paced angry and bruised. The story wasn't finished. But in that moment under the diner's glow, with Emma safe and Ramona's silhouette visible through the window, Daniel allowed himself something rare. He let himself believe in tomorrow. By mid-morning, the diner found its pulse again. Coffee drip ticking like a metronome, the grill whispering bacon prayers. Emma's pencil scratching out new lines in her sketchbook. Joel's mom had arrived at sunrise, her sobs muffled in Daniel's shoulder as she hugged her boy and thanked anyone within reach. Sheriff Cole promised statements later and left to draft the kind of reports that let the law keep pace with the truth. For a moment, thin as a paper napkin, but real Willow Creek exhaled. Daniel kept his body moving so his mind wouldn't circle the what-ifs. He cracked eggs 2 at a time, flipped pancakes at the first hiss curl of steam, and refilled mugs before hands even lifted to ask. Mary drifted like a ship under a practiced captain scolding the men at the counter for trying to pay twice. "You don't get to be heroes and tippers, Frank," she told Mallory, dropping his change into a jar labeled coffee and courage. Ramona stood back near the Hall of Honor sleeves rolled hair pulled into a quiet knot. She watched without interfering, an art she was just learning, and when she did move, it was for small things. A wiped ring of coffee under a mug, a chair straightened so its back didn't face the door, a hand on Emma's shoulder when a memory made the girl blink slow fast and steady herself. The scorch mark at the corner of the window had been cleaned and framed in clear oil. In the right light, it glowed like a bruise that refused to hide. A kid pointed at it as he left with his dad. "Battle scar," he announced. The dad didn't correct him. By noon, the rush thinned. Sun hammered the asphalt outside, heat shimmering above the road like a mirage that wouldn't commit. Daniel stepped out front with a rag to wipe the chalkboard sign PAE. "So good you'll forgive your ex." He hesitated, then added in block lettering beneath it, "Still standing." That's when the bikes came. Not a roaring pack this time, 3 machines and a clean Arrow, their chrome tidy, their engines tuned to purr rather than threaten. The lead rider swung off with an ease that screamed money and a gym membership. He wore a tailored vest under his leather, not a patch among them, and his boots had 0 dust. Sunglasses mirrored the sign back at itself. Inside, Mary felt the change and moved toward Emma without looking her body a ripple of protection. Sheriff Cole, who'd been pretending to nurse a slice of pecan pie in the corner booth, set his fork down and let his palm rest near his radio. The door chimed. "Mr. Harlow," the lead man said, voice smooth as a showroom floor. "My name's Cade. I represent an opportunity." "Coffee?" Daniel asked, not moving from behind the counter. Cade smiled like they were old friends. "No, sir. I make it a policy not to drink anything in a place I plan to purchase." Ramona's jaw went iron. Cole's knuckles whitened. "Not for sale," Daniel said, reaching for a towel. Cade nodded as if he had expected a line and brought a pen to underline it. He slid a folded sheet of paper from his vest and set it gently on the counter. Old school, as if the weight of ink could still impress a man who'd carried weight that wasn't numbers. "500,000, Cade said. "Cash. No questions. No lawyers. You hand me the keys, you walk away. Start over somewhere quiet." The diner went so still the fridge hum sounded like thunder. Daniel didn't touch the paper. He wiped the counter in a small circle until the stainless shone. He could feel Emma watching him from her stool, could feel Ramona watching him from the wall, could feel the sheriff's gaze steady as a hand on his shoulder. He set the towel down, reached beneath the register, and drew out a wooden box, the color of old smoke. The lid stuck once on a swollen hinge. He worked it free and lifted it open. Inside lay a purple heart. It wasn't pretty. The ribbon was frayed at the edges, the purple dulled to the color of old grapes, the metal dented so faintly you had to know where to look. Daniel didn't hold it up. He didn't speechify. He set the box on the counter between himself and Cade with the care men reserve for the sacred. "This," Daniel said, voice quiet, as snowfall was handed to me in a tent hospital outside Mosul. A piece of shrapnel missed my heart by half an inch. Took 2 of my men instead. I don't wear it. I don't display it. It lives here, so I don't forget what it costs to keep breathing." Cade was not the sort of man who blushed, but something drained from his face, a varnish of invincibility thinning. "I didn't get this because I fought." Daniel continued, "I got it because I survived what others didn't. And when I left the Corps, I brought one thing with me. This place. He tapped the counter, not the box, not the offer. The old wood whose grain he'd learned with his palms. "This isn't a building," he said, eyes lifting to meet Cade's mirrored lenses. In the reflection, Daniel saw himself small and Ramona smaller behind him. Emma, smaller still, a hall of souls in miniature. "It's the ground where a man put his ghost down and told them, 'You can live here if you stop trying to drive.' You can't buy that with zeros. You can't buy the room in the back where men sit in plastic chairs and tell the truth. You can't buy a 9-year-old's paper birds." A smile tugged at the corner of Mary's mouth. Emma's hand found the crane in her pocket and pinched its wing like a charm. Cade tried for humor and came up empty. His fingers touched the edge of the folded paper, as if even he knew it looked foolish there between coffee rings and a metal that had ridden out a war. "No offer." Daniel said gently, "Can buy the ground where a man reclaims his soul." Silence. Even the cicadas outside seemed to pause, seeding the floor. Cade took off his sunglasses. He had the kind of eyes that had only ever seen risk as a number. For a heartbeat, they looked human, bewildered maybe by a currency that wouldn't print. He nodded once, almost a bow, and slid the paper back into his vest. "Understood," he said. And this time there was no varnish. He turned to the riders behind him. "Let's go." They left as soft as they'd come. The bell chimed, the door eased shut, and the diner exhaled in a single ragged rush. "Did you?" Emma began. "I did," Daniel said, closing the box. He set it not back under the register, but on a small shelf near the Hall of Honor beside the cranes and the Polaroids. He didn't hang it, didn't spotlight it. He let it sit where people could see it if they needed to, and miss it if they didn't. Sheriff Cole stood and cracked his neck. "I'll be damned," he said, not with blasphemy, but with awe. "You ended a standoff without anyone bleeding." "Not every battle ends with bullets," Daniel replied. Ramona stepped closer, eyes bright in a way she didn't often allow. "You didn't shout," she said. "You didn't threaten. You just showed him what mattered." Daniel shrugged, but the shrug couldn't hide the heat in his throat. Sometimes silence does the heavy lifting. Word about the offer ran down Maine like a rumor with good legs. Instead of thinning the crowd, it swelled. Veterans trickled in without making a fuss, each with something in their hands, tokens that don't sound like much until they sit beside each other and become a language. A Vietnam vet named Ernie brought a shadow box, 3 dog tags, a tarnished Purple Heart, and an unopened pack of Marlboros. "For the boys," he said, sliding it gently onto the shelf. "The ones who didn't come home to cuss me out for saving these." A Navy cook set down a grease-stained recipe card for SOS, tiny notes in the margins too salty for kids have for Sunday. Add pepper when the world tastes gray. A young woman with a high and tight and the word corpseman on an old patch tucked a stethoscope into the corner of the shelf. "I don't use that one anymore," she said, "but it hears ghosts just fine." Frank Mallory arrived, last grease still in the creases of his fingers. He didn't speak. He stepped out front and looked long at the framed scorch mark under the oil. Then he hauled out a stepladder from his truck, a tray of paint, and a roll of chalk line. He tapped Daniel on the shoulder. "You mind it's your wall as much as mine," Daniel said. Frank snapped the chalk line, measured by eye, and started to paint. Others drifted out, drawn by the color taking shape. Kids fidgeted and whispered, shushed by women who didn't really want them quiet. In 40 minutes, the mark that had tried to be a scar grew wings. An eagle, broad-shouldered mid-flight, spread itself across the board above the door, its eye fierce but not cruel. Beneath it, in letters that looked hand-cut from resolve still standing. Mary wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand, that she declared is what a welcome sign looks like when it gets tired of being polite. Ramona stood beneath the eagle and felt the strangest certainty she had spent a life erecting logos, plating them, and steel throwing light at them until they blinded. This simple paint on old wood hit harder than any neon she'd ever bought. It wasn't selling anything. It was telling the truth. After closing, the town stayed. No one wanted to be the first to leave the warmth around that sign. Someone produced a guitar with 5 strings and enough tune to hold a song together. Sheriff Cole poured 2 fingers of year-old whiskey into paper cups and passed them to Daniel and Ramona. "To fires that don't take," he said. "To scars that tell," Daniel answered, and they clinked paper to paper. Emma tugged Ramona's sleeve. "I want to paint something," she said, suddenly shy. on a real canvas. What do you see? Ramona asked, kneeling so their eyes met. Emma looked at the hall, at the cranes, at her father's hands, at the Purple Heart, not elevated but present. A butterfly, she said, sitting on the eagle's wing, like their friends, not enemies. Ramona's throat tightened. She swallowed and nodded. Then that's what you'll paint. They set her up at a corner table with a canvas Mary had kept from a church fundraiser, under Daniel's watchful eye and Ramona's gentle suggestions. Let the blue breathe. Give the gold a little room. Emma worked. Her butterfly wasn't delicate. It was sturdy blue, and gold ink made flesh the kind that could survive heat and still find a place to land. When she was done, the room didn't clap. It just leaned closer. Reverend Hanks murmured a quiet amen. Frank turned away and pretended to check the ladder for drips. Daniel looked at the canvas and then at his daughter, and then he did a thing he rarely allowed himself. He closed his eyes and let gratitude hit him full in the chest. Night crept up the windows. The neon hummed. People peeled away in twos and threes, leaving behind the hush of a place that had decided its own identity. In the bunker, the paper cranes multiplied 15-20 more, and the Polaroids marched across the wall like a small, stubborn army. The Purple Heart stayed on its shelf, a heartbeat in metal. On the porch beneath the new eagle, Daniel and Ramona lingered. You know this isn't over, she said, voice low. I know, he answered. He'll send lawyers. He'll send bigger men. He'll send offers with more zeros and fewer scruples. Daniel glanced at the sign, then at her. Let him send what he knows. We'll answer with what we know. And what's that? He tapped the wood above them, still standing. She laughed, soft, honest, surprised at herself, and leaned against the railing. For a long minute, they said nothing. Down the street, crickets stitched their thin song into the edges of the quiet. Inside, Emma's butterfly dried blue and gold, catching the lamplight like a promise. Daniel locked up and tucked the keys into his pocket. He looked at Ramona, and for once there was no storm in his face, only weathered light. Breakfast at 6, he said. I'll be here, she answered. He nodded. Good. They stepped off the porch together and let the night take them not as a threat but as a road. Above them the eagle didn't move, but it watched, and in its painted eye the town could see itself bruised. Yes, threatened, yes, but anchored by a man who wouldn't sell a girl, who folded birds, a woman learning to be still, and a wall that told the truth to anyone bold enough to look up. Morning came thick with the smell of rain on hot asphalt clouds bruising the horizon as if the sky itself had been in a fight. Daniel was already at the diner before dawn, hands moving in the rhythm that kept him sane, flour into a bowl dough, pushed against wood, the hiss of bacon finding its pan. He liked mornings. They gave him the illusion of control a few hours before the day reminded him it had teeth. Emma shuffled in, hair tangled, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. You didn't sleep, she accused softly. Didn't need to, he said, which wasn't an answer at all. He slid a plate of pancakes toward her. Eat before school. Ramona arrived moments later, helmet under her arm, her leather jacket wet with drizzle. She had that look she carried in from another world, a mix of command and loneliness. They're talking, she said, brushing water from her sleeve. Daniel glanced up. Who investors? The ones behind Cade. I got a message. She didn't say from whom, but her tone made it clear it wasn't friendly correspondence. They're not just after your land, they're after influence. They want this town under their thumb. Your diner is just leverage. Emma forked a bite into her mouth, trying to look uninterested, but her foot bounced under the stool. She understood more than anyone gave her credit for. Daniel turned back to the grill, steadying his voice. Then they'll find out the difference between leverage and roots. The bell above the door jingled, and Sheriff Cole entered, hat-dripping rain eyes sharp. Heard chatter last night on the scanner, he said without preamble. Somebody's bringing in outsiders, big rigs. Could be a staging play. Mary arrived right then, carrying a bag of onions and a Bible tucked under her arm. She caught the drift mid-sentence. Outsiders, she repeated, eyes narrowing. This isn't a boardroom. This is Willow Creek, which is exactly why they think it's easy pickings, Ramona said. The tension was heavy like a storm just waiting for the crack. Daniel wiped his hands and leaned against the counter. So we plan. No guns, no fists unless they leave us no choice. We've got something better. Emma set down her fork. "What truth?" he said, and eyes that won't look away. Ramona studied him. There was a steadiness in his tone she hadn't heard before, a marine steadiness, the kind that measured time in deployments, not days. By noon, the rumor had spread. Folks came in not for pie, but for direction. The postman, Reverend Hanks Ernie, with his Vietnam cap, Frank Mallory with paint still in his hair. They crowded the booth's standing room thick as if the diner were the town's lung. Each brought a scrap of memory or a tool or just their presence. They didn't ask Daniel for orders, they offered what they had. "What do we do?" Mary asked, finally her voice carrying. Daniel looked at Emma, then at Ramona, then at the Hall of Honor. He thought of Cade's paper offer of the Purple Heart that sat quietly on the shelf of Emma's butterfly drying in the corner. His voice, when it came, was steady. "We make it clear, this place isn't for sale, not in ink, not in blood." The room hushed, but it wasn't silence. It was resolve knitting itself. That evening, the rigs came. Not a convoy of machines like bikers, but trucks matte black SUVs that looked too clean for dirt roads. They rolled slow down main engines, growling windows tinted. The town noticed. Blinds tilted, kids pulled inside, but no one scattered. They stood. The vehicles parked across from the diner. Men stepped out suits under raincoats, shoes, polished even in mud. They didn't look like gang muscle. They looked worse corporate soldiers, the kind who wield pens and contracts sharper than blades. One of them carried a briefcase. Another held an umbrella he never opened. And in the center, under a wide-brimmed hat, walked a man whose presence chilled the air, tall silver hair combed back, posture military, but eyes colder than coin. He didn't need to introduce himself. Everyone recognized power when it came dressed so neatly. Daniel stepped onto the porch. Rain tapped the brim of his cap, ran down the back of his neck, but he didn't move. Ramona flanked him. Leather jacket zipped Emma just inside, with Mary's protective hand on her shoulder. Sheriff Cole leaned against his cruiser, thumb near his radio, but not yet pressing. "Mr. Harlow," the man said, voice deep and polished. "My name is Adrian Cross. You've already met my envoy. I trust he extended courtesy." "He extended money," Daniel replied. "That's not courtesy. That's noise." Cross smiled thin as a blade. "Everything has a price." Daniel's reply was simple. He lifted the wooden box, opened it, and held up the Purple Heart so rain struck its dull face. "Not this." The crowd that had gathered, dozens now townsfolk and veterans alike, murmured, then quieted like a congregation. Cross's eyes flickered, annoyed by the show. He motioned to his men. One stepped forward with the briefcase, clicked it open to reveal neat stacks of bills, more than Daniel had ever seen in one place. The sight made Mary gasp, though she quickly clamped her lips. "2 million, Cross said. No taxes, no delays. Yours tonight." Daniel closed the box gently and set it on the railing. "You think you're offering freedom, but all you're offering is a leash and gold instead of iron." Cross studied him. Rain ran off his coat like it feared him. "You'll regret this stubbornness." Ramona stepped forward, then her voice sharp. "He's not stubborn. He's steady. There's a difference." Cross turned to her. Recognition flared in his eyes. "Ah, the prodigal daughter of the Carter Empire. I wondered how long until your rebellion landed you here." Ramona's jaw tightened. She didn't flinch. Cross's men shifted, but Sheriff Cole cleared his throat, hand dropping casually to his holster. "Town ordinances don't allow solicitation without permit," he said mildly, "and I count this as solicitation. It was small-town law, but it was law, and even men like Cross knew appearances mattered." He signaled to close the case. The bill snapped shut, wealth swallowed whole. "This isn't finished," Cross said. He gestured, and his men filed back into the SUVs. Engines flared, tires hissed against wet asphalt, and in minutes they were gone, leaving behind only the smell of exhaust and the press of rain. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They looked at Daniel, and something passed among them, a pledge without words. Inside, as the lamps flickered on, Emma whispered, "Dad, yes, Bug. They'll come back." Daniel knelt, hands steady on her shoulders. "Then we'll be here." Still standing, Ramona crouched too, her eyes meeting Emma's. And you won't be alone. Not ever again. Emma nodded, clutching her butterfly painting as if it could fly them all through the storm. That night Daniel stood alone on the porch after locking the door. The eagle painted above glistened in the rain wings, outstretched watching. He breathed in the wet night air and let it settle in his chest. Tomorrow would come with new threats, new trials. But tonight Willow Creek had chosen roots over ransom, truth over fear. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something fragile and fierce stir in him. Not just defiance. Hope. The storm broke fully by morning. Rain hammered the tin roofs, gutters overflowed, and Willow Creek's narrow streets turned into shallow rivers that carried away the dust of yesterday's defiance. Daniel rose early as always, and when he opened the diner, the bell's chime carried over the roar of the downpour like a call to gather. He found Ramona already there, perched at a booth with her leather jacket draped over the seat. Her hair was damp, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharpened the moment she saw him. "They'll strike again," she said, skipping any prelude. Daniel started the coffee pot. "I figured. Cross doesn't back down. He multiplies. And when a man like him is embarrassed in front of a whole town, he makes an example." Her voice was tight, edged with worry. Daniel set 2 mugs down, one in front of her, one for himself. Steam curled upward, softening the space between them. "Then we don't flinch when he does." The door opened. Emma ran in with Joel close behind, both bundled in raincoats too big for them. Mary followed, umbrella in hand, guiding them like ducklings. Emma's cheeks were red from the cold, but her grin was fierce. "We saw the sheriff. He said to tell you he's coming here after his rounds." Joel, quieter but braver by the day, slid into a booth. "Do you think they'll hurt us?" His voice wavered. Daniel sat across from him, steady gaze, anchoring the boy. "Not while I'm breathing." That answer seemed to calm Joel. Emma reached for his hand under the table, and the boy let her hold it. By mid-morning, the diner was packed again. Not just locals, men from the VFW hall, farmers from miles out, even truckers who'd heard talk on CB radios. Word traveled faster than weather. They came not for pie or pancakes, but for presents. Sheriff Cole arrived, dripping rain hat in his hand. He stood by the counter. "Cross has men scoping the freight yard again. Word is they're bringing heavier equipment generators, maybe fencing. They want to establish a footprint." "That's trespassing," Mary snapped. Cole nodded. "And we'll press charges if it sticks. But folks like Cross don't play by the kind of law I can enforce alone." His eyes landed on Daniel. "That's why they're watching you." Ramona shifted, leaning forward. "Because he didn't bend. Because he didn't break." Cole corrected. The words hung there thick as the storm outside. Afternoon brought the first test. A pair of SUVs rolled slow through town again, windows down this time. Men leaned out, smirks on their faces, snapping photos of houses, storefronts, the church. A warning without words. Kids were pulled inside, curtains drawn. But no one scattered. People stood on porches, arms crossed, eyes unyielding. Daniel watched from the diner's window. Emma pressed against his side, whispering, "They want us scared." "We're not," he told her. She nodded, but clutched his sleeve tighter. That night, after the crowd thinned, Daniel sat alone at the counter. The hall lamp buzzed softly. Rain still tapped at the windows, gentler now, like the town had caught its breath. He unfolded the old letter he hadn't shown anyone, creased, smudged, the ink faint but legible. It was from his CO years ago, the one that came after Afghanistan. "Harlow, you kept your unit together when command fell apart. You remind men what roots feel like." He hadn't believed it then. Now staring at Emma's butterfly painting taped to the wall, he wondered if maybe the CO had been right. The bell rang. Ramona stepped back in hair slick with rain, her face softer than he'd seen it. She slid into the booth across from him. "I should go," she admitted, "before they drag me into this mess. I've got enemies with more zeros in their bank accounts than you can count." Daniel studied her. "You could go, but you won't." She exhaled, almost laughing. "You're infuriating." "Marine trait," he said. For a moment, silence stretched. Then Ramona's voice cracked low. "I saw the way Emma looked at me today, like I wasn't just passing through, like she expected me to stay." Daniel's throat tightened. "She's lost too much. She doesn't let just anyone in. And I keep people at arm's length. Even me." He hesitated. "Especially you." Her jaw clenched, but instead of anger, there was something wounded in her eyes. Maybe that's why I can't leave. Outside, a low rumble of engines echoed again, closer this time. Daniel stiffened, listening. The storm might have eased, but the war hadn't. Cross wasn't done. He stood pulling on his jacket. Whatever comes, we face it, together. Ramona rose too, her expression resolved. Then together it is. Emma peeked from the back room, Joel at her side. She must have heard the engines. Dad Daniel met her gaze. Go upstairs, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Her lip trembled, but she obeyed, grabbing Joel's hand and tugging him along. The engines grew louder, headlights cutting against the rain-slick street. Shadows stretched across the diner's floor. Ramona stood beside Daniel, shoulders squared. Sheriff Cole's cruiser pulled up, two red and blue lights flashing a warning. The confrontation everyone had dreaded was no longer if. It was here. The street outside the diner glowed with harsh beams of headlights slicing through the lingering rain like blades. Engines rumbled low, steady, predatory. 4 SUVs this time lined up across Main like a blockade. Their doors open in perfect sequence, men stepping out with precision. Not bikers, not rowdy thugs, but corporate enforcers dressed in black coats and crisp shirts, their faces carved with discipline. At their center walked Adrian Cross, his hat tilted against the rain-silver hair gleaming under the street lamps. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone made the air heavy. Inside, Daniel felt his body shift into that old stance, back straight weight, even senses sharp as if he were back in uniform. Ramona noticed it too. She slid beside him at the window, her leather jacket creaking, jaw tight. They're not here to talk this time, she whispered. Sheriff Cole stepped onto the sidewalk first, hat pulled low, hand brushing his holster. Evening, gentlemen, he called, voice steady but firm. Town ordinance says you can't block Main Street. One of the men sneered. We're not here for ordinances. Daniel pushed through the diner door. The bell chimed absurd in the tension. Rain kissed his face as he planted himself on the porch. The wood under his boots creaked, but his voice carried clear. Cross, he said. You came all this way to see a diner you'll never own. Cross's lips curved faintly. I came to give you one last chance. Think of your daughter. Think of your future. One signature and you'll never worry again. Daniel glanced back through the window. Emma stood upstairs, pressed against the glass, her small hand against the pane. His chest tightened. He turned back, shaking his head. She doesn't need me rich. She needs me right. Cross's smile thinned. He motioned to his men. 2 stepped forward, carrying a metal case. They opened it right there in the rain. Inside gleamed documents wrapped in plastic, stamped with seals notarized slick with legality. Cross's weapon wasn't muscle. It was ink. This is your last offer, Cross said, voice low. If you don't accept, I'll bury you in courts until you have nothing left. Men like you don't survive paperwork. Daniel's answer came without pause. He reached up and gripped the collar of his flannel. With one motion, he tore it open, buttons snapping into the night. Gasps echoed from the crowd that had gathered in doorways and under umbrellas. Across his chest and shoulder, ink dark against pale scars stretched the globe and anchor of the Marine Corps. The tattoo glistened in the rain. I've already survived worse than paperwork, Daniel said, his voice steady booming. I survived war. I survived losing everything but that little girl upstairs. You think I'll surrender a diner? This diner. You don't know me! The crowd erupted. Old veterans saluted without being asked. Farmers and townsfolk stepped forward, filling the street behind Daniel, behind Ramona, behind Sheriff Cole. No weapons, no fists, just presence unshaken. Cross's men froze. For the first time, calculation faltered in their eyes. This wasn't one man against a corporation. It was a town against invasion. Ramona stepped forward, rain dripping off her leather sleeves. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Daniel, her voice slicing through the storm. You're not welcome here. Not in this town. Not in this life. Leave. Cross's jaw flexed, his composure cracking. He scanned the faces, young, old, scarred, stubborn, all of them united. His men shifted uneasily. He knew the optics. He knew the cameras on phones. He knew the power of a community refusing him. Slowly, with venom in his glare, Cross turned. This isn't over, he hissed. He gestured sharply, and his men retreated. Doors slammed, engines roared, the SUVs pulled away taillights, bleeding into the rain until they disappeared down the highway. Silence fell, broken only by the storm easing at last. Daniel stood there, shirt-torn, chest-heaving, tattoo bared. He hadn't realized he was trembling until Ramona laid a hand on his arm. "You didn't just save the diner," she murmured. "You reminded them who they are." Emma burst through the upstairs door, racing down, barefoot, tears on her cheeks. She threw herself into her father's arms, hugging him so hard he staggered. "I thought they'd take you," she sobbed. "Never," Daniel whispered into her hair. "Not while I'm standing." The crowd began to cheer, then low at first, then swelling into something fierce and alive. Laughter, clapping, even song from Reverend Hanks, who started a hymn right there in the rain. It wasn't about victory, it was about survival, roots, family. Mary pressed her Bible to her chest, tears in her eyes. Sheriff Cole adjusted his hat, muttering, "Well, I'll be damned. Haven't seen a stand like that since I left the army." Ramona looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. Beneath the scars and the stubbornness, she saw the man who had carried a town on his back without asking. Her voice was low, meant only for him. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." Daniel held Emma close, the storm finally lifting, the streets washed clean. For the first time in years, he believed it. Hope wasn't a stranger anymore. It was home. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.